Hello everyone, I'm the Creep's Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I remember my grandmother telling me this story so many times when I was growing up. I never really believed in anything that sounded out of the ordinary, but she swore by it until her last day. The way she used to tell it, I could almost hear the fear still sitting inside her chest after all those years. Whenever I think about it now, I feel something tighten inside me because if what happened hadn't happened the way it did, I wouldn't even be here. It was during the war in London. My dad was just a tiny baby, barely a few months old. My grandfather was away, working somewhere for the war effort. My grandmother was alone with my dad in their small house when it happened. One evening, there was a bombing raid. The sirens had gone off, and the whole sky was full of that deep screaming sound that makes your stomach twist. People always say you get used to it after hearing it for months, but my grandmother said you never really do. It always made her chest go cold. That night, she lost her house. A bomb landed somewhere nearby, and the blast shattered the windows, ripped off half the roof, and the rest of the house wasn't safe to live in anymore. She grabbed whatever she could carry and held my dad close, wrapping him in his blankets and tucking him under her coat so he wouldn't freeze. She didn't even have time to pack proper clothes for herself. Just some nappies for him, some bottles, and a tin of powdered milk that she always kept in the kitchen. She went to stay with a friend of hers. That friend lived in a street that had been bombed before, but was still standing. It was an old house with narrow wooden stairs, faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, and small rooms stacked on top of each other like boxes. The friend didn't have much space, but she cleared out the small guest room on the top floor for my grandmother and my dad. There was a single bed in there, a chest of drawers with the top drawer broken, so it never closed properly, and a little wooden cot that her friend had brought out from storage for my dad. My grandmother said she felt bad about being in someone else's home, taking up their space, but she didn't have any choice. It was war. Everyone was just trying to survive in any way they could. She spent that evening helping her friend cook dinner, boiling potatoes and slicing thin pieces of cabbage into a pot, then sitting with her by the fire while they listened to the radio talk about the battles going on in Europe. My dad slept on a blanket in front of the fire, his small chest rising and falling so fast like babies do. She used to say that was her favorite sound, just him breathing, alive. Later that night, after the blackout curtains were pulled tight and the street outside was completely dark except for a faint moon behind the clouds, she picked him up from in front of the fireplace. He smelled like warm milk and a bit of soot from the coal fire. She carried him towards the stairs to go up to the little room they had set up. She said the stairs were narrow and creaked so loud under her feet that she always worried she'd wake up the whole house. That's when she saw it. She told me every time that she didn't know what to call it because it didn't look like a normal person, but it didn't look like anything else either. She said it wasn't see-through like you hear in ghost stories. It was just there, a figure, like a man standing in the dark on the staircase landing, blocking the way up. She stopped with her foot on the next step and tightened her grip on my dad. She said he stirred and made a small whining noise, but didn't wake up. She said the figure didn't move. It didn't raise its hands or try to touch her. It didn't say anything. But somehow, she said, it told her, not in words but straight into her bones, that she shouldn't go up there tonight. She said it was the clearest feeling she'd ever felt in her life. A warning, as if it was telling her, don't sleep up there tonight. Just like that. No stories, no details, just the feeling, don't go. She stood there frozen for what felt like minutes, just staring at it. She tried to blink it away, thinking maybe it was just her tired eyes playing tricks. But it stayed. She felt her chest get tight, and her hands went numb, and she turned around slowly, trying not to jostle my dad in her arms. She walked back down the stairs, her knees shaking so badly she had to grip the rail so she wouldn't fall. When she got back down to the sitting room, her friend was still awake, putting some leftover dishes away in the kitchen. My grandmother told her she wasn't going to sleep upstairs that night. She didn't tell her about what she saw. She just said she didn't feel safe there. Her friend got annoyed. She said there was no room in the sitting room and that she had already made the bed upstairs. But my grandmother insisted. She spread out some blankets on the hard wooden floor and laid down there, curling my dad up against her chest. The fire had burned down to glowing red pieces of coal, and the room felt cold and damp in the corners, but she wrapped him tight in his blanket and pulled her coat over herself. She said she lay awake for hours, staring at the dark ceiling beams, listening to the ticking clock on the mantelpiece and the distant thud of bombs falling somewhere far away. Every time one landed, the house rattled slightly and bits of dust fell from the ceiling. She could hear the house creaking, settling, breathing like an old, tired animal. My dad slept through most of it, just making little noises and kicking his feet once in a while. At some point, after she dozed off for a few minutes here and there was a flash so bright it lit up the whole sitting room like daylight for a split second. Then there was an explosion so loud it felt like it came from inside her own head. The windows shook and rattled, some of them cracking straight through. My grandmother curled over my dad's body and pressed her face against the top of his head. She said she could feel her own heart pounding against his back. When the sound faded and her ears stopped ringing, there was silence. Heavy silence, like the world was holding its breath. Then she heard a loud crashing noise from upstairs. The ceiling above her shook, and bits of plaster fell down onto her hair and coat. She didn't move for a long time. Just lay there, holding her baby, staring at the floorboards, smelling the cold soot from the fire, waiting for something else to happen. Eventually, her friend came running in from the kitchen, her face pale and covered in dust. They went upstairs together, and when they opened the door to the little guest room, they saw that the ceiling had collapsed in. The roof beams were splintered and sticking down into the room like broken ribs. Chunks of wood, tile, and bricks lay all over the floor, right on top of the cot where my dad was supposed to sleep that night. There was so much rubble, you couldn't even see the cot anymore. Just bits of wood poking out from underneath all that heavy mess. My grandmother stood there shaking. She felt her knees go weak, and she sat down right there on the dusty landing floor, holding my dad tight against her chest. She said she didn't cry. She just felt empty and cold, staring at what could have been his grave if she had gone up there like she was supposed to. After that, her friend didn't complain again about them sleeping in the sitting room. They stayed down there for the rest of their time in that house until my grandmother managed to find somewhere else to go. She told me she never saw that figure again. But every night after that, for years and years, even after the war ended and she moved into a small council flat in the quiet suburbs, she would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating and shaking, thinking about what almost happened. She said sometimes she could still see that figure standing in front of her, solid and silent, blocking the way up the stairs. She didn't know if it was something from her own mind, a trick of fear and exhaustion. She didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that nonsense, as she always said, but she believed in what she saw that night. She believed something saved her and her baby. Whether it was her own instinct warning her or something else, she said she would never know. But she swore by it till her dying day. When she told me this story as a child, I always imagined it in my head, seeing her standing on those narrow wooden stairs, the dim light of a candle flickering against peeling wallpaper, the smell of cold coal smoke filling the house, her thin shoulders shaking as she held my dad close. I imagined the silent figure standing there, just a shape in the dark, no face, no eyes, just a warning pressed deep into her chest. I imagined the ceiling falling in, the wood splintering, the bricks smashing down onto that little cot. Whenever I think about it now, I feel a chill run through me. Because if she had ignored that feeling, if she had gone up those stairs and laid my dad down to sleep in that cot under that roof, he would have died that night, crushed under all that wood and brick. And I wouldn't be here to remember her story, or to tell it. She saved both their lives by listening to something she couldn't see or touch, something that told her to stay away. Sometimes, late at night when I lie awake and the world is quiet, I wonder about that figure she saw. Whether it was real or not, whether it was just her own fear trying to keep her safe. I'll never know, and she never knew either. But that story stayed with her till the end, and it stays with me now. Because sometimes life is like that. You don't get clear answers. You just feel something so strong inside you that you can't ignore it. And later you find out it was the only thing that kept you alive. That's all there is to it. Just a small moment, a small warning in the dark, that changed everything forever. I still think about that day more than I want to admit. It comes back to me in flashes, like I'm back in that parking lot under the flat gray sky, the air feeling heavy and stale against my skin. I was only 19 then, It had only been a week since I'd gotten my CPR certification. I remember feeling proud after passing that class, thinking about how if someone ever choked at work or collapsed on the sidewalk, I'd be ready. I never imagined the first time I'd have to use it would be like this. My friends and I were at this old thrift store, digging through racks for Halloween costumes. The place smelled like dust and faded fabric, and that old air freshener smell thrift stores always have. We were laughing about some ugly clown suit when I said I needed to try on a jacket I found, so I walked to the dressing rooms at the back. They were those cheap little stalls with full-length mirrors screwed onto the doors, and I remember looking at myself in that mirror, thinking the jacket was too big on my shoulders. I could hear my friends joking outside, teasing each other about costumes. Then it went quiet, like someone just turned down the volume on the whole world. I could still hear the air conditioning humming, but all the voices were gone. I paused for a second, holding the jacket in my hands. I opened the door, thinking maybe they'd moved to another aisle, but when I stepped out I saw everyone crowded near the front window. There was a man saying something, and the cashier had her hand on her mouth, eyes wide. I walked up, feeling a tightness in my chest. The man was saying that there was a woman passed out in the parking lot. No one seemed to know what to do. I just blurted out that I was CPR certified and I'd go check on her, and that someone needed to call 911 right away. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet store. As I walked out the automatic doors, the world felt weirdly still. The lot was half empty, cracked asphalt with little weeds growing up through the lines. The sun was hidden behind thick clouds, making everything look flat and dim. I didn't see anyone lying on the ground. For a moment I thought maybe she'd gotten up. Maybe she'd just fainted for a second and left. Then someone behind me shouted that she was in a car parked far out by itself. I turned and saw the car. It was parked near the edge of the lot where there were no other cars, sitting alone like it was trying to hide. I started running, my feet slapping against the ground, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it filled my chest. As I got closer, I could see her slumped against the window on the driver's side. I slowed down, and my stomach dropped so hard I felt like I was going to throw up right there on the asphalt. Her face was blue. Not pale, not flushed, but blue. Her lips, her cheeks, even under her eyes. I'd never seen a person look like that before. Her head was tilted to the side, pressed against the window. Her eyes were half closed, and I could see the tear streaks on her cheeks. That's one thing I'll never forget. She had tears running down her face, like her body had been crying even after her mind was gone. Someone else came up behind me and tried the door. It was unlocked. They opened it, and a bunch of stuff fell out onto the ground. There were empty pill bottles rolling across the asphalt. A couple of used heroin needles clinked as they hit the pavement. The smell hit me next. It was this sharp, sour smell mixed with sweat and stale perfume. It made my stomach twist even tighter. She had the red rings around her eyes, those dark sunken circles you see in heavy drug users, but on her they were tinted blue because she had so little oxygen left. Someone knelt down beside her and checked her pulse on her neck, but they just shook their head, their mouth opening and closing without any words coming out. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, and felt for a pulse myself. Her skin felt cold and clammy under my fingertips. I couldn't feel anything, but my hands were shaking so bad I wasn't sure. We had to get her out. 2 people grabbed under her arms while I grabbed her legs, and we lifted her out of the car. Her body felt heavy, but also limp. Dead weight. Her head lolled back, hair brushing the ground as we laid her down on the asphalt. There was a little plastic toy car under her seat, the kind toddlers play with, and a stuffed giraffe. I saw a car seat behind the driver's seat as I backed up to start chest compressions. I placed my hands on her sternum, just like I'd been taught. I remembered my instructor telling us to use the beat of "Stayin' Alive" to keep the right rhythm, but in that moment my brain just screamed the words "Don't die" over and over. I started compressions, pressing down as hard as I could, feeling her ribs shift under my palms. The man next to me tilted her head back to check for breathing again, and her tears just kept running down her temples onto the asphalt. I don't know how long I kept going. My arms burned. Sweat dripped down into my eyes, stinging them. I felt like I couldn't catch my own breath, like I was drowning right there with her. Then I heard sirens. They came screaming into the parking lot, red and blue lights flashing off the store windows and cars. The ambulance pulled up fast and EMTs jumped out. They had that look on their faces, that calm but focused look like they'd done this 100 times before. They told me to move back, and I just stumbled away, my knees weak and shaking. I stood there panting, my hands numb, as they got their equipment out. Another ambulance came a minute later, and more EMTs jumped out. Soon there were 6 of them surrounding her. One was pushing air into her lungs with a bag valve mask. Another was starting chest compressions where I left off. Someone else pulled out a vial and syringe, prepping a dose of something. I remember looking at her arms then. She had tattoos, 2 names inked into her skin in cursive, probably her kids. I felt my chest tighten even harder when I saw those. The cop who showed up told us they gave her a drug that could reverse heroin overdoses if given in time. Narcan, I think. He said she was pretty much gone already. They'd keep working on her until they got to the hospital, so they could officially call it there. The EMTs lifted her onto a stretcher and rolled her into the back of the ambulance. They kept doing compressions the whole time, the woman's body jerking with each push. The doors shut with a final loud clank that seemed to echo in the quiet parking lot. The siren blared again as they pulled out and drove off. I just stood there staring at the spot where she'd been lying. The asphalt was marked with smudges from her tears and a little bit of dirt from her hair. My friends came up to me, and they looked pale and shocked. We all just stood there, not really knowing what to say. The thrift store cashier was crying. People started to drift back into the store slowly, like they didn't know what else to do. I picked up the empty pill bottles and needles with a plastic bag someone handed me and set them in a pile by her car, so the police could collect them for evidence. I remember looking into her car one last time before the cops taped it off. There were old fast food wrappers on the floor, a pair of worn-out sneakers on the passenger seat, a hairbrush wedged under the emergency brake. There was also a sippy cup on the floor by the car seat, with dried milk residue inside. It hit me so hard then. She wasn't even that old. Probably late 20s. She might have been a mom picking up her kid from daycare or school that morning. I wondered if someone was waiting for her to come home that night. I wondered if someone was calling her phone over and over right then, getting no answer, feeling that panic build. We left after the police finished taking statements. The ride home was silent. My friends kept glancing at me like they wanted to say something, but no one did. I stared out the window at the passing streets, my hands resting in my lap, still feeling that numb tingling under my skin. When I got home that night, I sat on my bed and stared at my hands for a long time. They were red and sore from the compressions, my knuckles scraped from hitting the asphalt a couple times. I kept thinking about her tears. I kept thinking about those tattoos with the 2 names. I didn't know if she survived. I checked the news the next day and didn't see anything about it. Maybe that meant she made it, or maybe it didn't. I'll never know, but I remember every detail. The way the sky looked, the smell of her car, the feeling of her chest under my palms, the way her tears kept falling even after she couldn't cry anymore. And I remember thinking, as I lay in bed that night staring at my hands, that getting my CPR certification was the best thing I ever did, even though I never wanted to use it again. Because even if she didn't make it, at least I tried. At least she didn't die alone in that car, slumped against the window with no one noticing until it was too late. I still think about her kids sometimes. I wonder if they ever ask about her tattoos when they're older. I wonder if they ever ask why she didn't come home that day. It makes me angry at the world, how it just keeps moving forward like nothing happened. But I guess that's what life is. You try to help when you can. You try to keep breathing yourself. You try to carry those memories without letting them crush you completely. Some days are harder than others. Some days I still wake up feeling her chest under my palms. And I just take a deep breath and keep moving, because that's all I can do. I was back at my parents' house for the summer holidays. I hadn't really planned to stay that long, but after the exams and everything that happened at university, I felt like I needed a break. I arrived there in mid-June, and by July, I had settled into my old room again. It felt strange being back, honestly. The posters on the walls were the same ones I put up when I was 16. The bed felt smaller, my chair creaked more than I remembered, and the room smelled a bit different, like dust mixed with leftover perfume and wood polish. But it was quiet, peaceful, and safe. That night, I was awake pretty late. I had been playing games on my computer, then ended up watching random YouTube videos until almost 3 a.m. Everyone else in the house was asleep. I remember the silence of the house very clearly, the way it felt almost heavy, pressing against my ears. The only sound was the low hum of my computer fan and the ticking of my old wall clock. Sometimes I would hear a creak in the wood, but that house always made little noises at night. It never bothered me. I think it was around 3:07 a.m. when I got the call. My phone was lying on the table next to me. It buzzed suddenly, and the sound of it against the wood made me jump a little. I looked at the screen and saw it was my sister calling. Her contact picture was still the one from last winter, her wearing a beanie and smiling at the camera with snow in her hair. It felt odd. Her room was just down the hallway. If she wanted to say something, she could have just walked to my door. I thought maybe she was feeling sick, or she just didn't want to get out of bed. I reached for the phone to answer, but as soon as I pressed the green button, the call ended. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, waiting to see if she would call again, but she didn't. I thought about calling her back, but then I decided to just go check on her instead. Maybe she dropped her phone and accidentally called me. When I got up from my chair, I felt that tightness in my back that you get from sitting for too long. I stretched a little before opening my door. The hallway was pitch dark. I didn't bother turning on the light. I just used the light from my phone screen to see. Her door was closed, but I saw a bit of light from underneath, so I thought maybe she was awake and reading. I walked to her door slowly, yawning as I went. Just as I reached for the handle, I heard her scream. It wasn't just a loud shout. It was a full scream, the type that comes from your chest, sharp and terrified. My heart jumped up into my throat. I didn't even think. I just grabbed the handle, twisted it, and pushed the door open. Her room was dark except for a small lamp on her table. She was sitting up in her bed, clutching her blanket to her chest, her eyes wide and wet with tears. I looked around immediately, my eyes trying to adjust to the dim light. I checked near her wardrobe, behind the open door, near her study table, even on the side of the bed. There was nobody there. The room felt still, heavy, silent again except for her sobbing. She was breathing hard. I could hear her chest heaving, and the blanket shook in her hands. I stood near her for a moment, trying to understand what was happening. Finally, she calmed down enough to wipe her tears and look up at me. She looked so scared, her face pale and her lips trembling. She kept looking around her room, like she expected something to jump out from the shadows again. She told me she woke up and saw a dark shape right in front of her face. She said it was so close she could feel it, almost like it was leaning over her. She said it was darker than the room, and she could see the outline of where its head and shoulders were, just inches from her. That's when she screamed. She said she shut her eyes tight and screamed until she heard me enter the room. When she opened her eyes, it was gone. I felt cold all over when she said that. The idea of someone standing that close to her while she slept, it made my skin crawl. I asked her if her door was locked, and she nodded. I checked it myself. It was locked from the inside. The window was closed and latched too. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. I checked under the bed, even though I knew it was impossible for anyone to hide there. It was empty, just boxes of old clothes and her school stuff. Then I remembered the call. I told her she had called me just before she screamed. She looked confused. She said she didn't call me. She was asleep the whole time until she woke up and saw that dark shape. I thought maybe she called me by accident in her sleep, but she shook her head and said her phone wasn't even in her room. She said she left it downstairs in her purse. That didn't make sense to me. I pulled out my phone and showed her the call log. Her name was there. The time was there. It showed a 5-second call. She grabbed her blanket tighter when she saw it. Her breathing quickened again, and she asked me to go check her phone. I went downstairs slowly. The staircase creaked under my feet, and the living room was so dark I couldn't see the furniture clearly. I used my phone torch to look around. Her purse was on the couch, exactly where she said it would be. I unzipped it and found her phone inside. The screen was off, but when I pressed the button, it lit up and showed the lock screen. I carried it back upstairs to her room. She unlocked it with her fingerprint. We checked her call log. There was nothing there. No outgoing call to me at that time. In fact, the last call she made was around 10 p.m. to her friend. There was no record of a call to me at all that night. I checked her recent apps to see if something weird was running, but there was nothing suspicious. Just Instagram, YouTube, and her gallery. She looked even more scared when she realized there was no call log. She just kept shaking her head, clutching her blanket tighter, and staring at her phone like it was a snake. I didn't know what to say to her. I didn't know what to think myself. It was real on my phone. The time, her name, everything. But her phone said it never happened. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe a glitch in the network, maybe some weird system bug. But even then, how would it show as her number if the phone was off in her purse the whole time? She refused to sleep alone after that. I stayed in her room that night, sitting on the chair near her bed with the lamp on. Every time I felt my eyes closing, I forced myself awake. I kept looking at her, making sure she was still breathing normally, making sure there was nothing near her face in the dark. My mind kept playing tricks on me. I thought I saw shapes moving in the corners of the room, shadows shifting when nothing was there. Every time I blinked, I felt like something would be standing there when I opened my eyes again. Eventually, the sun started coming up. The light coming through the curtains made the room feel safer again. I heard my dad's alarm go off downstairs, and the normal sounds of morning returned to the house. Birds outside, the tap running, cupboard doors opening and closing. My sister finally fell asleep just after sunrise. I watched her breathing slow down and her eyes flutter shut. I stayed awake until my mom called us for breakfast. We didn't tell my parents about it. We just sat at the table, quiet, pushing cereal around in our bowls. She kept looking at me, and I kept thinking about that call. Even now, months later, when I check my call log history, I still see that call. Same time, same duration, same number. Her phone never had it. She doesn't even like thinking about that night. She tells me to stop bringing it up whenever I mention it. Sometimes I think about what really happened. I wonder if someone cloned her number, but that would be such a random and pointless thing to do. I wonder if her phone somehow called me from her purse, but that doesn't explain why there's no log on her end. I wonder if it was just a system error, but that doesn't explain the dark shape she saw. I think about how scared she looked, the way she was shaking, the tears running down her face, how her voice cracked when she tried to speak. I never found an answer. That was the first time I felt unsafe in my parents' house. Before that, it was the safest place in the world for me. But now, every time I go home, every time I walk down that hallway at night, I think about how close that dark shape was to her. I think about the call that came from nowhere. I think about how silent the house was that night. So silent I could hear my own heart beating as I sat in her room until the sun rose again. I never really liked how my house sat on the lot. It was different from every other place on the street. Most of the houses lined up evenly, giving a clean look to the block. But my house sat farther back, tucked away almost like it was trying to hide from the road. Even when I was younger, it felt wrong somehow. The sidewalk ran alongside the house instead of ending at a neat front porch like everyone else's. Ours ran the entire length of the living room windows before it finally met the small front porch, which led straight into the living room. Those windows were the worst part of the house, in my opinion. They were huge, covering almost the entire front of the living room. My parents loved them because they let so much light in during the day, making the house bright and cheery. But for me, it always felt like I was in a display case. They didn't open either, just giant panes of glass that made you feel like a fish in a tank, exposed to anyone walking by. At night, they turned into black mirrors, and if you tried to look out, all you could see was yourself staring back. When my family left for vacation, I told them I wanted to stay home. I just needed a break from everything: school, work, responsibilities, all of it. They were going to be gone for a week, and I had planned to do nothing except drink and sleep and watch movies in peace. The first couple nights were fine. Quiet. Almost too quiet. The silence made every little sound stand out, like the ticking of the kitchen clock or the hum of the fridge. I kept the TV on most of the time just to drown it out. That night, I started drinking early. By around 7 in the evening, I was already feeling warm and lazy. I sat on the couch in the living room, half watching some old movie I didn't care about. I remember thinking about going to bed in my own room, but then feeling this heavy dread wash over me. My room was all the way at the back of the house, down a narrow, dark hallway. For some reason, the idea of walking back there alone in the dark felt wrong. Like if I got up and walked back there, I would see something standing in the hall, waiting for me. I laughed it off at first, but the feeling stuck, growing stronger the drunker I got. So I decided to just sleep on the couch. It was easier. I grabbed a blanket, curled up under it, and fell asleep facing the big windows. I woke up a few times throughout the night, groggy and uncomfortable. I remember waking up around midnight and looking at the dark windows, seeing only my reflection and the faint glow of the TV screen. The room was quiet, and I pulled the blanket tighter around me before drifting off again. I don't know what woke me up the final time. It wasn't a sound. I just opened my eyes all at once, wide awake in a way that didn't make sense. It felt like my entire body was on alert before my mind even caught up. I lay there, staring at the back of the couch for a few seconds, confused. That's when I felt the chills. It wasn't cold in the room. If anything, it was too warm with the blanket wrapped around me. But I felt this deep, biting cold run up my spine, leaving goosebumps all over my arms and neck. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't even want to move. But my eyes flicked upward anyway, looking at the window above me. That's when I saw it. There was someone standing right outside the window. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I thought I was still asleep, having some messed up dream. But then the banging started. Loud, hard bangs, right against the glass. The sound of flesh and bones slamming into the window, rattling it in its frame. I flinched, but I didn't move. I just lay there, staring up at the person. It was too dark to see their face clearly, but I could see the shape of their head and shoulders against the faint glow of the streetlights. They were leaning forward, hands flat against the glass, forehead pressed up against it. They were looking straight down at me. The bangs didn't stop. They kept hitting the window over and over. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. But I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just watched them. I glanced at the cable box on the TV stand. The green numbers glowed brightly in the dark room. It was just past 3 in the morning. I remember thinking about how quiet the world felt outside of those bangs. Like the entire earth had gone silent, except for the pounding against the glass above me. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The person didn't move away. They were still standing there, forehead pressed against the glass, breathing hard enough to fog it up. I could see the cloudy circles their breath made against the window. Every second felt like an hour. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't run. If I moved, I felt like they would smash the window and grab me. My eyes started to water because I wasn't blinking. Then, out of nowhere, the banging started again, but this time it wasn't just the window. There was a heavy, loud pounding coming from the front door too. My whole body went cold again. Someone else was at the door, hitting it with the same force as the person at the window. The banging came in uneven bursts. First the window, then the door, then both at the same time. The entire front of the house shook with the force. I lay there, listening to them pound on my house, too scared to even cry. I remember wondering why none of the neighbors were waking up. Didn't they hear it? Didn't they care? But in my heart, I knew no one was coming to help me. I was alone in that house, and there was no one who would come running if I screamed. So I didn't scream. I just stayed still, hoping if I was quiet enough, they would leave me alone. They kept at it for so long, I lost track of time. It felt like an eternity. Every bang sent shivers down my body. I felt like a hunted animal, trapped in a cage, waiting for the moment they would break through the glass and get to me. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even grip my phone. I didn't even know where it was at that point. It was probably in the kitchen, charging. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the banging stopped. I didn't dare move for the longest time. My ears rang with the leftover echoes of their fists slamming against the house. I lay there under the blanket, staring up at the now empty window. I couldn't see anything out there except the faint reflection of the living room again. But I knew they were still out there, somewhere in the dark. I stayed on that couch until the sun came up. Even then, I didn't feel safe. The morning light filled the living room, making everything look normal again. But nothing felt normal to me anymore. My whole body ached from lying so still for so long. My neck was stiff, my legs were numb, and my head pounded with a mix of fear and a hangover. When I finally managed to get up, I locked every door and window in the house, even though I knew it wouldn't have stopped them if they really wanted to come in. I walked outside, blinking against the bright sun, and looked at the ground beneath the windows. There were footprints all over the flower bed, pressed deep into the dirt. I followed them around the side of the house, feeling my stomach twist with every step. The footprints ended near the back fence, where the grass was trampled and broken branches littered the ground. Whoever they were, they had stood there for a long time before they walked off into the trees behind the property. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. I guess I thought, what would they do? Whoever it was, they were gone now. Calling the cops wouldn't change the fact that 2 people stood outside my house in the middle of the night, pounding on the windows and door like animals trying to get in. It wouldn't take away the memory of lying there, frozen in terror, too scared to even move. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the living room. I vacuumed, wiped down the windows, rearranged the cushions on the couch. It felt like if I could just make everything look normal again, maybe I could convince myself it was just a bad dream. But it wasn't. Every time I walked past the window, I felt my chest tighten, expecting to see a face looking in at me. That evening, I called a friend and asked him if he wanted to come over for the rest of the week. I didn't tell him everything, just that I didn't want to be alone anymore. He laughed it off at first, but when I insisted, he said no. He didn't want to spend his nights in my creepy house. I couldn't blame him. I didn't want to be there either, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. I slept in my room that night, door locked, dresser pushed up against it, baseball bat under my blanket. I didn't sleep much though. Every sound made me jump. The wind against the windows, the floor creaking under the weight of the house settling. My own breath sounded too loud. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting down the days until my family came home. When they finally did, I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't want them to think I couldn't handle being alone. But I started sleeping with my door locked every night after that. I kept the blinds shut tight, even during the day. I stopped sitting in the living room altogether. The couch stayed empty, the big windows covered, blocking out the world outside. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and I can't sleep, I think about those 40 minutes. I think about the way they banged on the windows and door like they owned the place, like they knew I couldn't do anything to stop them. And I wonder what they wanted. I wonder what would have happened if the glass had broken, or if the door had given in under their fists. I wonder if they'll ever come back. And I wonder most of all, if next time, I'll be ready for them. Because deep down, I know there will be a next time. People like that don't just disappear forever. They wait, and they watch, and they come back when you least expect it. Until then, all I can do is keep the doors locked, keep the blinds shut, and pray that the banging never starts again. When I was really young, weekends were my favorite. I had awesome parents who always let me sleep in the living room on Friday and Saturday nights. They set up my little blanket and pillow on the couch, and I felt so special being allowed to stay up. My sister was a light sleeper, and any small sound woke her up, so they let me have the TV all to myself in the living room. I would stay up watching whatever was on late-night channels, mostly old sitcoms and black and white shows on Nick at Night, with the volume turned low so it didn't disturb anyone. Sometimes I would watch until dawn. But most nights, I ended up falling asleep on the couch with the TV glowing in front of me, making the room feel warm and safe. The light from the TV felt like a shield against the darkness outside. That night felt no different at first. I remember I was lying sideways on the couch, with my blanket pulled up to my chin. The TV was still on, but the colors and shapes didn't make sense anymore. My eyelids were so heavy that they kept closing. I gave up fighting my sleep and let myself drift off. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up suddenly with this weird prickly feeling in my chest, like a jolt of fear for no reason. It was like something inside me yelled to wake up. I sat up so fast that my head felt light. My heart was beating like it was trying to break out of my ribs. I just sat there in the dark living room, breathing hard and staring straight out the big front window. We lived in rural Georgia, way out where there were no streetlights and only a few houses spread far apart. The front yard ended in thick woods, and beyond those woods was just more land, empty and quiet, filled with trees that seemed to stretch forever. The moon was bright that night, casting silver light across everything. I could see the black outlines of the trees against the sky. At first I didn't know why I felt so scared. I just stared out into the night. Then I saw it. There was someone sitting in one of the trees. I could see the outline clearly because the moon was right behind them, like they were placed there on purpose to be seen. My eyes felt glued open, and my skin prickled all over with cold sweat. The shape didn't move at first. It just sat there. I couldn't tell if it was facing me or looking away. I remember thinking, why would anyone be sitting in a tree at this time of night, in the middle of nowhere? Our family dog, Buddy, who slept on the rug by the front door, suddenly jumped up with a deep growl in his chest. He ran straight to the window, barking with his teeth bared and his ears pinned back. His growls turned into loud, angry snarls that echoed through the house. The silhouette didn't move. It stayed right there in the tree, almost blending with the trunk, except for the way it blocked the moonlight. My hands were shaking so badly that I grabbed my blanket and ran as fast as I could down the hallway to my parents' room. I remember feeling like my legs weren't working right because I was so scared. My knees almost buckled when I got to their door, and I just pushed it open and ran to Mama's side of the bed. I kept trying to tell them what I saw, but my words felt stuck in my throat. My dad sat up immediately, his eyes wide, and he grabbed something from under his side of the bed. I think it was a bat or a metal rod he kept for protection. He rushed out with Buddy, who was already waiting by the door, growling and barking like crazy. Mama pulled me onto the bed with her and wrapped her arms around me. I could feel my heart thumping against her chest. It felt like we sat there forever waiting for Dad to come back in. Finally, he returned, looking serious but calm, and said there was no one out there. He said maybe I just saw a branch or shadows moving, but I knew what I saw. I felt it deep in my bones, that there was a person out there sitting in that tree, watching the house. After that, I didn't want to sleep in the living room anymore. I picked up my blanket and pillow and went to my bedroom. My sister was half asleep, but she woke up when I came in and asked why I looked so scared. I told her everything in a hushed voice while I pulled my blanket over me. She didn't say anything back, just rolled over facing the wall, but I could tell she was awake. My dad was walking around the house, checking the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked up. I could hear his footsteps moving back and forth on the hardwood floor, then the sound of him sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Every few minutes he would get up and look out another window. I tried to tell myself it was safe now. Dad was awake. Buddy was awake. Mama was awake in her room. My sister was here in her bed. I closed my eyes, but my chest still felt tight, and I couldn't take a deep breath. I tried to focus on the sound of Dad's chair creaking and Buddy's paws tapping lightly on the floor as he followed Dad around. I think at some point I must have drifted off again. But then I woke up to that same feeling, the prickling fear, like needles all over my body. My eyes opened slowly this time, like I was too scared to look, but couldn't stop myself. I turned my head towards the window beside my bed. The moonlight was shining in through the thin curtains, just enough to see shapes outside. And there he was. The man was standing outside my window. I could only see part of his face because of the angle and the curtain, but it was enough. He was staring right into the room. I could see his shoulders moving up and down slowly, like he was breathing calmly, not even out of breath from running. His hair looked messy, and his skin was pale in the moonlight. He lifted his hand up slowly and put a finger to his lips, giving me the shush signal. Then he turned around and walked away, not rushing, just walking in a straight line away from the window, back into the darkness. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt locked up, and my chest felt like it was caving in. Tears just started pouring down my face. I couldn't stop crying. It felt like my whole body was shaking with silent sobs, and I tucked myself under my blanket, squeezing my eyes shut so hard they hurt. I remember thinking I was going to throw up because my stomach hurt so much from the fear. I don't know how long I cried, but it felt like hours. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept waiting for him to come back, kept thinking I would see his face pressed against the glass again. The next morning, the sun came up like it always did. The sky turned orange, and the birds started chirping outside. I could hear Dad making breakfast in the kitchen and Mama talking softly to him. My sister was already up, sitting on her bed brushing her hair like nothing had happened. I sat up slowly, feeling cold and stiff. My eyes felt swollen from crying. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside, half expecting to see him standing there still. But there was nothing, just the yard, the grass with dew on it, and the line of trees at the edge of the property, silent and peaceful. I went to the kitchen and sat at the table while Dad put a plate of eggs in front of me. I couldn't eat. My hands were shaking too much to hold the fork. Dad sat down across from me and asked if I was okay, but I couldn't look him in the eye. I just shook my head. Mama came over and rubbed my shoulders softly. She told me it was going to be okay, that maybe I was having bad dreams, but I knew I wasn't dreaming. I knew what I saw. I knew how real it felt. Later that day, Dad went outside with Buddy to look around the yard and check for footprints, but he didn't find anything. He told me maybe it was an animal or a shadow again, but I could hear the worry in his voice. That night, he stayed up late again, sitting in his chair with his coffee, watching the windows. I stayed in my room with my sister, my blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the window until my eyes burned. After that, I never wanted to sleep in the living room again. I never asked to stay up late on the weekends. I always went to bed when my parents told me to. Even now, years later, I can still see that silhouette in the tree when I close my eyes. I can still see his finger pressed to his lips, telling me to stay quiet. And the scariest part is that I never saw where he went after he walked away into the trees. He could have been out there for hours, just watching the house, waiting for another chance to come close. It took me a long time to stop thinking about it every night before I fell asleep. But even now, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with that same prickly feeling in my chest, and I have to check the window just to make sure he isn't there, standing in the moonlight waiting. I never used to think much about walking alone in the woods. I grew up around forested land, with small trails running like veins through thick trees and brambles, where the only noises were birds, insects, and the crunch of leaves under my boots. It was a place that made me feel calm and at ease with myself, away from noise and people, and anything that reminded me of work or stress. That afternoon a few years ago was no different at first. I'd had a bad week at work, full of people giving me orders and fake smiles, and I just wanted to clear my head. It was late autumn, the air cold but not freezing, just enough to make my nose sting a little and my breath look like smoke. I was walking along an old track I'd used before, but then, without thinking about it, I stepped off into the undergrowth. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity about where a deer trail led, or maybe I just wanted to feel even further from life and noise and everything I knew. I pushed through some saplings and ducked under branches, moving carefully so the brambles didn't tear my jacket. I'd been walking for about 10 minutes off trail, where the trees were closer together, and the ground was uneven and littered with fallen branches. The only noise was the crunch under my boots and a few crows in the distance. That was when I smelled it. At first I didn't think much of it, just a whiff of something sweet, heavy in the cold air. But then it got stronger. It was so thick and sickly sweet that it almost felt warm in my nostrils, and I stopped and frowned. I looked around. There were no flowers here, no rotting fruit, just moss, bare dirt, dead leaves, brambles, and tree trunks. My chest felt tight for some reason, like something deep in me knew before my head did. I hesitated, then stepped toward where the smell was coming from. I pushed back a tangle of brambles, their thorns scraping my gloves and sleeves, and there he was, lying on his side, back against the base of a tree, head tilted slightly toward the forest floor. His skin was bloated and greenish-black, splitting in places where dark liquid oozed out and soaked into the leaf litter. His clothes were torn, probably by animals, and his shoes were missing. Flies moved in dark, shifting clouds above him, and small insects crawled in and out of his mouth, which was half open, as if he was trying to say something but couldn't finish it. I froze. My legs felt like concrete. For a long minute, I just stared at him, taking in every single detail because I couldn't not look. The way his hands were curled tight to his chest. The dark patches where skin had rotted away. The bloating around his stomach that made his clothes look stretched and long. The ants in his hair. The smell was so strong now I gagged and had to turn away, wiping my mouth on my sleeve as bile burned my throat. My chest felt like it was caving in, my heart hammering like it wanted to escape my ribcage. My hands were shaking as I fumbled my phone out of my pocket. It took me 3 tries to unlock it because my fingers wouldn't work right, and when I finally dialed the police, my voice sounded thin and distant, like I wasn't there. They asked where I was, and it took me a while to explain because I wasn't on any marked path. I gave them my GPS location from my phone and described the area as best as I could. They told me to stay put, to wait with the body until officers arrived so they could find it easier. I just said okay. I didn't know what else to say. When I hung up, I stood there for a long time, staring at the ground, trying not to look at him again. But every few minutes my eyes would flick back to him. The sun was getting low through the trees, pale orange light catching on the flies and making them look like floating sparks. I didn't sit down at first. I just stood, shifting from foot to foot, my body aching from tension. After maybe half an hour, I crouched down on a mossy rock nearby, far enough that the smell wasn't as strong, but close enough that I could see him clearly. I pulled my knees up to my chest, wrapping my arms around them, feeling small and cold and horribly alive. I kept thinking about who he was, what had led him here, why he was alone. I could see a piece of rope tied around his neck, hanging loosely down his chest. It looked frayed and old. Part of me wanted to get up and check for ID, but another part of me couldn't move. My head felt heavy, like it might fall off my shoulders if I tried to stand. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving the woods in shadow. The trees turned black against the dark blue sky, and I could hear the night insects starting their calls, the sharp click of crickets, and the soft buzzing of flies settling down for the night. My phone screen glowed in the darkness when I checked the time. It had been over an hour since I called. I put it away quickly. The light made everything around me feel darker. The cold came up from the ground, seeping into my feet and legs until I was shivering. I tried to keep my eyes on the trees instead of him, but my gaze kept drifting back. His body looked like it was sinking into the forest floor, almost like the earth was swallowing him up bit by bit. I tried not to think about what the animals had eaten, what parts of him were missing. I tried not to think about what his eyes might have seen before he died. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard voices calling out through the trees. Flashlights flickered between trunks, and I stood up so quickly my knees almost gave out. I waved my arms and shouted, my voice cracking from how dry my throat was. They came over quickly, 2 officers and a man in a dark jacket with some kind of medical emblem on it. I stepped back as they approached him, watching them put on gloves and masks before kneeling beside the body. One of them asked if I was okay, and I just nodded because I couldn't talk. My mouth felt glued shut. They didn't talk much as they worked, shining their lights over him, taking notes and photos, marking spots with little flags. They told me later that he had committed suicide. They found a frayed rope hanging from a high branch above him, snapped in half, and the rest was around his neck. They guessed it had broken after he died and he fell down. I don't know how long he'd been there, but judging by how he looked, it had been at least a week. They walked me out to the track where their cars were parked. I remember turning back one last time before we left the trees, looking at where he was lying under the dark canopy, flies swirling in the beams of their flashlights. It felt like leaving something behind, but I didn't want to stay. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw him, his bloated face, the way his mouth hung open, the insects crawling over his lips. It was worse because I kept thinking about who he had been before that moment. If he had family who missed him. If he had friends who wondered where he went. If he had been scared at the end. After a few days, when the shock started to fade, the dreams began. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, shaking so hard I could barely move. In my dreams, he was always there, sitting at the end of my bed or standing in the corner of my room, his swollen face dark and dripping, flies crawling from his eyes. He never moved his mouth, but somehow I could hear him, telling me that I'd disturbed him, that he was finally resting before I found him, that it was my fault he was still in pain, that I should end it like he did, so I could understand how it felt to be free. I woke up from those dreams feeling like there was a weight on my chest, like something was pressing me down into the bed, suffocating me. Sometimes I couldn't get back to sleep for the rest of the night. I'd sit with the light on, staring at the door, feeling like he was on the other side waiting to come in. I tried therapy. I told them about the dreams. They said it was trauma, that my brain was trying to make sense of what I'd seen. They said it would pass in time if I worked through it. I nodded and told them I understood, but inside I wasn't sure. Because sometimes the dreams felt more real than anything else. Sometimes I'd wake up and I could still smell him, that thick rotting sweetness filling my nostrils until I wanted to vomit. It's been years now. The dreams come less often, but when they do, they're just as strong as ever. I never walk off trail anymore. I stick to the paths where other people walk, where I can hear dogs barking in the distance or kids laughing on their bikes. The woods aren't peaceful anymore. They're full of things hidden away, things you might find if you step off the track, things you'll never forget once you've seen them. I think about him sometimes when I can't sleep. I think about how he ended up there alone, hanging from that tree in the middle of nowhere. About what he was thinking in those last few seconds. About whether he felt relief or terror when the rope tightened around his neck. Whether he regretted it as soon as he stepped off the branch. Whether he thought anyone would ever find him. Whether he wanted them to. I think about how I sat there with him in the dark for hours, the only living person beside him for miles. How the night closed in around us, and the air grew colder and colder until I couldn't feel my toes. How the insects kept buzzing and crawling, and feeding no matter how still everything else was. How the forest didn't care that he was dead, didn't care that I was there, didn't care about anything at all. I think about how, even now, part of me feels like I left something behind there, or maybe brought something back with me. Something that still follows me into my dreams and sits in the corner of my room at night. waiting for me to close my eyes so it can show me again what I saw that day, in the quiet, dark woods, far away from everything and everyone I knew. I woke up before sunrise that morning, packed my truck with my sleeping gear, my stove, my little cooler, and a few cans of beer. I felt like I needed to get out of town for a bit, clear my head. Work had been rough lately, and I was sick of seeing concrete and screens every day. I didn't really tell anyone where I was going. I just drove out west into the valleys where the hills roll out forever, covered in sagebrush and scrubby pines. I didn't check the weather or the roads. I didn't check cell service either, though I should have. I just drove until the highway turned into dirt, and the dirt turned into a trail that crawled along the side of the valley. I found a wide spot to pull over and parked, boots laced tight, backpack full, ready to wander until my legs got tired. I walked along a trail that followed the river below, winding through grass as tall as my waist and little patches of trees here and there. The sun was hot, but the breeze kept it from feeling heavy. I climbed a little ridge and looked back at my truck, just a dot among brown and green. It felt good to be alone. I didn't pass a single hiker the whole afternoon. I spent time climbing boulders, sitting and watching little brown lizards dart in the dust, listening to the river run down the bend below me. When the sun started going down, I realized I was still pretty far from the truck. I wasn't scared, but it made me pick up the pace. I knew I'd have to camp close to the road, because by the time I'd get back it would be close to dark. As I came around a curve in the trail, I saw a man up ahead. He was maybe in his 40s, thin, tanned, with messy hair and a rough beard. He wore jeans and a faded brown shirt with the sleeves cut off. There was a small backpack over his shoulders. He nodded at me as I approached and asked if I was planning on camping out here. I told him yeah, probably somewhere by the road, so I didn't have to stumble around too long after dark. He seemed nice enough. He smiled and told me about a spot just off the trail, only a 2-minute walk from where I parked. He said it was hidden from the road by brush and trees, but close to the river if I needed water. I thanked him, and he just nodded again, turned, and walked off down the trail without another word. I didn't think much of it at the time. By the time I got back to my truck, it was almost dark. The sun had slipped behind the western ridge, leaving everything shadowed and turning blue. I grabbed my gear, followed the directions he gave me, and found the spot easily. He was right. It was perfect. A flat patch of dirt surrounded by willows, with the river only 20 feet away. The brush between the campsite and the road made it almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I built a little fire, cracked a beer, and pulled out my friend's comedy podcast on my phone. I didn't care about being loud. I laughed and listened, tending the fire and feeling the night settle in. Crickets chirped everywhere, and the river sang in the background. I watched sparks swirl up into the dark sky. It felt peaceful, like the kind of peace you only get far away from other people. I was tired from the hike, and I thought about setting up my tent, but looking at the darkness all around me, I felt lazy. I had my truck parked right up the little path, and I had the topper on the back with my gear inside. It was easier to crawl into the bed and sleep with my sleeping bag rolled out next to my cooler and backpack than mess around with tent poles and stakes in the dark. So that's what I did. I left the fire to burn down into embers, zipped myself into my bag in the back of the truck, and fell asleep listening to the river. I woke up when it was still dim outside. The sky was pale blue and pink, birds making soft sounds in the trees above. I stretched out my legs, pulled on my boots, and got out of the truck. The air was cool and smelled like damp earth and smoke from last night's fire. I got the flames going again with some dry sticks and made myself a beer for breakfast, half joking with myself that it was like camping tradition. I pulled out a little frying pan, cracked a couple eggs into it, and set it over the fire. I was poking at the eggs, thinking about maybe going down to the river to rinse my face when I felt something. That feeling like someone's eyes are on you. I turned my head and saw him. A man, just standing at the edge of the trees. He was about 50 feet away, partly hidden by the brush, but close enough that I could see he was watching my camp. I felt my chest tighten. At first I thought maybe it was the same local dude from yesterday. But when I looked closer, I saw it wasn't him. This man was different. Older maybe. Dirtier. He had long tangled hair and a beard that was so ratty it looked like straw hanging from his chin. His clothes were layers on layers, covered in what looked like hundreds of plastic grocery bags tied all over him. Some were flapping gently in the breeze. Blue bags, white bags, yellow ones. They rustled like leaves whenever he moved. He was just standing there, staring but not really at me. His eyes were sort of unfocused, looking past me, through me. I felt a sharp, cold feeling in my stomach. I tried to act normal. I said out loud, "Nice morning, huh?" But he didn't react. Didn't blink, didn't nod. He just kept staring through me. I turned back to my eggs for a second, trying to calm myself down. Maybe he was homeless and living out here. Maybe he needed food. I offered, "You want some breakfast?" Nothing. No movement. He stayed at the edge of the camp, his body hunched over a little, his hands hanging down at his sides. I could hear him breathing, a rough, ragged sound like a sick dog. He started pacing, walking along the edge of my camp, crunching dead grass under his boots. His head moved, but his eyes never met mine. He kept staring down at the ground or off to the side, dragging his feet as he moved. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. I offered him a beer, my voice shaky now. Still nothing. No flicker of recognition. He turned his back to me, standing facing the trees, and just started mumbling to himself, words I couldn't hear or understand. It was like he was having a conversation with someone else in his head. He moved one hand up to touch the bags tied around his chest, then let it fall again. I felt the panic start to creep up my throat. I looked at my frying pan, the eggs going cold, and felt stupid for thinking this was going to be a peaceful trip. My eyes darted to my bear spray and my buck knife, sitting next to my sleeping bag in the truck bed. I moved slowly, picked them up without taking my eyes off him. I gripped the can of bear spray, so tight my hands started to ache. I didn't want to turn my back on him. I didn't want to look away for even a second. I felt like if I did, he would run at me or grab something, or do something I couldn't stop. I felt anger rise up behind my fear, burning hot in my chest. I yelled at him then, my voice cracking, "Motherfucker, you're either going to acknowledge me or leave right now." The words came out sharp and loud, echoing in the trees and down to the river. He didn't flinch, didn't even twitch. He just kept mumbling at the trees. My heart was hammering so hard it made my chest hurt. I flicked the safety off the bear spray and took a few steps towards him, feeling gravel crunch under my boots. Finally, he moved. He didn't turn around or look at me. He just shuffled forward, away from my camp, deeper into the brush. The plastic bags rustled against each other as he walked. He didn't hurry or run, just moved away slow like he wasn't even aware of me. I watched him until his shape blended into the trees and disappeared. I stood there shaking, the can of bear spray still aimed where he had been. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, and my breathing sounded ragged in my chest. I looked around at my camp, the fire still burning low, the eggs going stiff in the pan, my beer sitting open on a rock. Everything felt wrong, like the air itself had changed since he appeared. I didn't even bother to clean up. I threw my frying pan, my food, my bag, everything into the truck bed. I kicked dirt over the fire until the smoke stopped rising. My hands were trembling so bad, I almost dropped the keys as I shoved them into the ignition. I didn't look back at the trees. I didn't want to see him again. I didn't want to know if he was standing there, watching me drive away. As I pulled back onto the dirt road, tires skidding on the dry ground, I felt my stomach clench tight at the thought that maybe he had been there last night too. Maybe he watched me laughing by my fire, watched me crawl into the back of my truck to sleep. Maybe he stood out there all night, waiting or listening. I felt cold all over thinking about it. I thanked whatever lazy part of me decided not to set up my tent, because sleeping out there on the ground with only nylon walls between me and him, I don't think I could have handled that. I drove fast down the winding road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every curve I took too fast made my gear shift in the back, thumping against the sides of the truck bed. I didn't care. I just wanted out of that valley. I wanted to see other cars, other people, anything to remind me that I wasn't alone in the world with whatever that man was. When I finally hit pavement again, I pulled over, turned off the truck, and just sat there shaking. The sun was high in the sky now, warm and bright. Birds were singing in the fields along the roadside. It all felt wrong, like I had stepped out of some nightmare into a world that kept going without knowing what happened out there in the valley. I sat there for a long time, feeling the fear drain out of me slowly, leaving me tired and cold. I never went back to that place. I never told anyone exactly what happened either. They wouldn't understand. They'd think it was just a homeless guy or some harmless hermit living out there. But I know what I felt in my chest when I saw him. I know the way the air felt different, the way his eyes never looked at me. the way he moved like nothing mattered. I know what I felt, and I still wonder sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night or sitting by a campfire, if he's out there somewhere in the dark, staring at someone else's camp, listening to their laughter, waiting for them to sleep. I still think about that night sometimes when I ride my bike home late. It was one of those warm summer nights, the kind where you can ride for hours without getting cold, and the air feels heavy with leftover heat from the day. My friend and I had been biking around the city for hours, just exploring empty streets, cutting through alleys, racing down small hills, feeling completely free and careless because it was midnight and no one was out. We laughed so much that night. I remember feeling my cheeks hurt from smiling when we finally stopped at the end of her street to say goodbye. She lived only a few streets away from me. We stood there for a while, sweaty from riding but comfortable in the warm night air, talking about nothing and everything, how tired we were, what we might do tomorrow. Eventually we hugged and she went inside, and I started pedaling slowly towards my street. I only had about 2 blocks to go. The streets were quiet, dead actually, just the hum of streetlights and the buzz of insects in trees. It felt peaceful, but also strangely empty. Because of construction on the road, I had to ride on the sidewalk. I wasn't too worried because it was midnight and no one was out, but right before I was about to turn left onto my street, I saw a man walking ahead of me. He looked like he was maybe in his 40s. He had dark hair, a little scruffy but not dirty, wearing jeans and a dark jacket despite the heat. He didn't look homeless, just like some random guy walking alone at night. The sidewalk was narrow, and I didn't want to scare him by riding too close behind, so when I got about 6 feet away, I called out in a normal voice, "Hey, behind you," just so he wouldn't be startled when I passed. As soon as he turned around, I knew something was wrong. He spun fast and looked right at me with this glare, his face tight with anger like I had just insulted him. His eyes didn't look tired or surprised, they looked furious. I felt a cold flush go down my neck. I kept riding past him and turned down my street, thinking he'd keep walking in the other direction or ignore me. But I heard his footsteps change behind me, getting faster. Then I heard him yelling. He was screaming the worst things I've ever been called, shouting that I was a fucking cunt, and he was going to kill me, that I thought I was better than him, that I should die. His voice echoed on the empty street, bouncing off the quiet houses, the words hitting my back as I pedaled harder. I live right off that corner, just a few houses down, but I didn't want him to see which house was mine. I felt like my body knew what to do before my brain did. I turned down the next street to loop around the block again. My legs felt like jelly, and my hands shook on the handlebars as I rode as fast as I could. I remember thinking how stupid it was that I felt so tired right then, that I should have saved some energy from our bike ride for moments like this. I didn't look back until I was halfway down the street, but when I did, I didn't see him following me anymore. I tried to slow my breathing. My heart was racing so hard that I felt a little dizzy. I circled the block, thinking that maybe he kept walking, maybe he was drunk or high and already forgot about me. But when I finally got back around to my street, I looked down it before turning, just to check if he was gone. My stomach dropped so hard I felt like I was going to puke. He was standing on my front stoop, facing the street. He was just standing there like he belonged there, his hands in his pockets, looking out towards where I was. The porch light was off, but the street lights lit him up just enough that I could see he was staring straight at me as I rode by. He didn't yell this time, didn't move, didn't wave or threaten me again. He just stood there, like he was waiting. I didn't even think about what to do. My hands turned the handlebars and I kept riding, pedaling straight past my house without slowing down. My heart felt like it was squeezing itself smaller and smaller until it would disappear. The street was empty and silent except for my tires on the cracked sidewalk and the quiet hum of bugs in the grass. I didn't dare look back again. I just rode around the next corner and kept going, my legs burning with each push of the pedals. I didn't stop riding until I got back to my friend's house. I didn't even text her before I knocked on her window. She let me back in and asked what happened. I tried to tell her, but my mouth felt frozen. My hands wouldn't stop shaking for over an hour. I remember sitting on her bedroom floor, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to its gentle ticking, trying to slow my breathing while she sat next to me rubbing my back. I stayed there that night. I didn't go back home until the sun was coming up and the streets were busy again with cars and joggers and parents walking their kids to day camps. I I felt stupid and dramatic when I finally walked my bike back up my front steps, half expecting him to still be there. But he wasn't. The stoop was empty, the door locked, everything normal. My mom was already awake, making coffee when I walked in. I didn't tell her the full story at first, just said I stayed over because we were too tired to bike home. I think part of me felt embarrassed, like maybe I had imagined how scary it felt. But then I remembered the way his face looked when he turned around, and the way he stood there on my porch like he owned it, and I felt sick all over again. Later that day, I texted my mom about it properly, told her what happened. She asked if she should call the police, but I told her I didn't know what they would even do. The guy was gone. He didn't break in, he didn't touch me, he didn't even yell the second time. He just stood there, watching, waiting. We decided not to call anyone, though my mom did tell me to always come straight home next time, or to call her if I felt unsafe. 2 days later, I woke up and went outside to get my bike from the side alley where I always left it chained up, and it was gone. Someone had cut the lock clean through. My stomach turned to ice again. I don't know if it was him or just someone else passing by who saw an easy steal, but every time I think about it, I imagine him taking it, rolling it down the alley in the middle of the night with that same quiet, hateful stare on his face. I didn't ride at night for a long time after that. Even now, years later, I still feel my chest tighten when I ride past that spot on the sidewalk where he turned to look at me. I remember the emptiness of the street, how alone I felt in that moment, how my mind raced with every worst possible outcome I could imagine. I still wonder what would have happened if I had turned into my house right then, if I had trusted that he would just keep walking. I think about waking up with him standing outside my bedroom window, or hearing him break down the door while I was asleep. I think about how he didn't yell or move the second time he saw me, how he just stood there staring with that blank look on his face, like he knew exactly where I lived and was thinking about what to do next. That night changed how I see empty streets, how I see men walking alone at night, how I see my own front steps when they're dark and quiet, and I'm fumbling with my keys to get inside. I still ride my bike a lot, but when the sun goes down, I make sure I'm already home with the door locked behind me, the porch light on, and my bike sitting safely inside the hallway where no one can touch it again. I woke up before sunrise that morning. My body felt heavy and stiff because I had slept in the back seat of my car all night. I stretched out my legs as best as I could and rubbed my eyes. The windows were foggy from my breath and the cold mountain air outside. I sat there for a moment, just listening to the quiet. The forest was still dark, but I could see the faint outline of tall pine trees against the dark blue sky. It was that time of day when everything was gray and silent and cold. I was parked on the side of a dirt road about 20 miles into the mountains. I came out here because I wanted to try a new hiking trail I found online. I had planned to come the day before and camp overnight, but by the time I finished packing and driving up here, it was already dark. I didn't want to risk setting up my tent in the dark alone, so I just slept in my car. When the light started to come up a bit more, I got out of the car. The air was cold and sharp on my face. I pulled on my thick hoodie and my boots. The forest smelled like wet dirt and pine needles. There was dew on everything. I opened the trunk and took out my small backpack. Inside I had a bottle of water, 2 protein bars, a small bag of trail mix, my folding knife, and my phone. I didn't have signal here, so my phone was only useful for photos or as a flashlight. I locked my car, put the keys in my pocket, and started walking down the narrow dirt road to find the start of the trail. It felt good to be alone out there. The forest was waking up slowly. Birds started calling out in short, sharp songs. Little bits of sunlight were breaking through the trees in thin golden lines. I found the trail marker nailed onto a pine tree, a faded orange ribbon tied around the trunk. The ground was soft with fallen pine needles and dry leaves. The trail led into the trees and curved out of sight. I felt calm as I walked, listening to the crunch of the ground under my boots and my slow breathing in the cold air. The trail went uphill for the first half hour. My legs burned a bit, but it felt good to move. I stopped once to drink some water and look around. The forest was still quiet except for birds and the faint creaking of trees swaying high above. I kept walking for another hour. The sun was up now, but it wasn't hot. The forest stayed cool and shady. After a while, the trail flattened out and opened into a small clearing. The ground was covered in dry grass and patches of hard dirt. There were old logs scattered around, fallen years ago, their bark stripped away by weather. I sat on one of the logs and ate one of my protein bars. The silence felt heavy here. The only sound was wind moving through the tall grass on the edge of the clearing. I sat there for a while, just breathing and staring at the trees on the other side. I don't know how long I sat. Maybe 15 minutes. When I stood up to keep walking, I noticed something that didn't look natural on the far side of the clearing. It was partly hidden behind some bushes and a thick tree trunk. I walked closer to see what it was. As I got nearer, I saw that it was an old metal barrel lying on its side. The top was dented and rusted, covered in moss and pine needles. It looked like it had been here for decades. I nudged it with my boot, and it rolled a little, making a hollow metallic echo that felt too loud in the quiet forest. I didn't think much of it and kept walking. The trail narrowed again and went deeper into the trees. The light got dimmer as the trees grew closer together. After another half hour, I stopped to drink more water. When I took out my bottle, I thought I heard a branch snap far behind me. I froze for a moment. It was completely silent again. I listened hard, staring down the trail behind me. Nothing moved. I waited a minute longer, but didn't hear anything else. I told myself it was probably a deer stepping on a branch. I put the bottle back in my bag and kept walking. I tried to forget about the sound, but I kept feeling like something was behind me. Every few minutes I would stop and turn around, looking down the trail. Each time there was nothing there. The forest felt different now. Less calm. The wind had stopped completely. The trees were dead silent. I could hear my own breathing and the blood in my ears. I kept walking, a little faster now. My boots hit the ground harder and louder with each step. My stomach felt tight. I didn't know why I felt like this. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was a squirrel or bird, or just my mind playing tricks on me because I was alone in the woods. After another 20 minutes, I came to a steep slope where the trail went down into a small ravine. I stopped at the top, looking down. There were big rocks sticking out from the sides of the slope, and dry brown leaves everywhere. It looked slippery. I decided to sit down and slide down slowly on but instead of trying to walk and slipping. As I sat down and started sliding, I thought I heard something again behind me. I turned my head sharply, and for a split second I thought I saw movement between the trees up the trail. It was just a dark shape moving behind a tree and disappearing. I stared hard but saw nothing else. My heart was beating fast now. I kept sliding down the slope, small rocks and dry leaves crunching under me. At the bottom, the trail continued along the bottom of the ravine. The ground here was damp and muddy in some places. The air smelled like wet dirt and rotting leaves. I felt a cold breeze moving along the bottom of the ravine, even though the air above had been still. I walked quickly, looking around as I moved. The trees here were thick, and their roots stuck out of the muddy ground like twisted ropes. I almost tripped twice. Every time I stumbled, I felt my heart jump up into my throat. My breathing was getting shallow and fast. I felt like I was being watched. After what felt like forever, the trail started to go uphill again out of the ravine. My legs burned as I climbed, grabbing roots to pull myself up. When I got to the top, I stopped and bent over, breathing hard. My ears were ringing from the blood rushing through my head. I stood up straight and looked around. The forest looked the same in every direction. Tall, dark trees, patches of sun breaking through, thick underbrush. I turned around to look down the trail I had come up. That was when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Far down the trail, at the bottom of the ravine, I saw a person standing there. They were standing perfectly still in the middle of the trail. They were wearing dark clothes, maybe black or dark gray. I couldn't see their face clearly because of the distance and the shadows. They didn't move at all, just stood there, facing up the trail towards me. I felt a cold wave wash through my body. My chest felt tight, and my arms felt heavy. I stared at them, waiting for them to move or say something. But they didn't. They just stood there like a shadow between the trees. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. Why was someone out here alone, standing still like that? I felt panic starting to rise in my chest. I turned around and started walking fast up the trail. My legs felt weak and shaky. I kept looking back over my shoulder, but I couldn't see them anymore through the trees. I walked faster and faster until I was almost jogging. The forest was silent around me except for my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. I don't know how long I kept moving like that. Maybe an hour. My legs were burning and my feet hurt, but I didn't stop. I just wanted to get back to my car. The trail kept twisting and turning through the trees. At some point I stopped to catch my breath. My mouth was dry and my throat felt tight. I drank some water, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the bottle. I put it back in my bag and kept walking. Finally, I started to recognize parts of the trail from earlier. The old metal barrel appeared between the trees as I came around a bend. Seeing it made me feel a little better because I knew I was getting closer to the road. I walked past it and into the clearing again. The sun was higher now, but it still felt cold. I crossed the clearing quickly, not stopping this time. I just wanted to get back to my car. When I got back to the dirt road, I almost cried from relief. I walked down the road as fast as I could until I saw my car parked between the trees. I ran the last few steps, unlocked it with shaking hands, and threw open the door. I jumped into the driver's seat and locked all the doors. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, staring out the windshield at the forest around me. Everything was quiet. Nothing moved. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the trees. I started the car and turned around carefully on the narrow dirt road. My tires crunched over rocks and dry pine needles. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror. I expected to see someone walking down the road behind me, but there was nothing. Just the empty road disappearing into the trees. I drove all the way back down the mountain without stopping. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. When I finally reached the small highway at the bottom of the mountain, I felt like I could breathe again. I pulled into a small gas station and sat in the car for a while before going inside to buy a bottle of cold water. My body felt numb. I drank the whole bottle sitting on the curb, staring out at the passing cars and the warm morning sun. Even now, when I think back to that day, I can still see that dark shape standing at the bottom of the ravine, not moving, just watching me. I don't know who it was or what they wanted. Maybe it was just another hiker, but something about the way they stood there without moving, without making any sound, felt wrong. I never went back to that trail. I still hike sometimes, but I always choose crowded trails now, the kind with families and groups of friends. I never go alone deep into the forest anymore. That day showed me that you never really know who is out there, hidden in the trees, watching in silence, waiting for you to notice them when it's already too late. I never really liked the idea of going on long road trips alone, but that summer, I didn't have much choice. I was supposed to drive from my apartment in the city to my uncle's farmhouse way out in the country. It was almost a 7-hour drive if traffic was good. He had called the week before, saying the barn roof was leaking badly and he couldn't fix it alone. He was getting old, and I felt like I owed him help for everything he'd done for me when I was a kid. So I packed up a small bag, got some snacks, filled up my old silver Toyota Corolla with petrol, and left early in the morning just before dawn. The highway out of the city was quiet at that time. There were only a few trucks and a couple of cars. I kept sipping the coffee I had picked up on the way out. It was still dark, but starting to get that faint blue glow on the horizon. I always felt calm during that time of the morning. As I kept driving, I watched the sun rise slowly, first lighting up the tops of trees and then turning the whole sky a deep gold. It felt good, just quiet and peaceful. After about 4 hours, I pulled into a small roadside station to stretch my legs. I bought another coffee, used the bathroom, and walked around my car checking the tires and the hood just out of habit. Everything seemed fine. The woman at the counter was on the phone, looking bored, tapping her nails against the counter. I didn't say anything, just nodded as I left. Back on the road, I passed wide fields, empty stretches of land with nothing but yellow grass and small trees scattered here and there. Sometimes I would see cows grazing far from the fences, their heads down, tails flicking away flies. The highway signs kept showing the miles to my uncle's town dropping down. I started thinking about what work I'd have to do when I got there, wondering if I would need to climb up on the barn roof or just hold the ladder for him while he hammered in new shingles. About an hour away from my uncle's place, there was a small turnoff that cut through a forested area. It was an old road, with cracked asphalt and tall pine trees leaning over it from both sides. I had always avoided it because it felt creepy, but my uncle used it often. It saved nearly 40 minutes. I thought, fine, I'd take it this time to get there faster. I turned onto it and felt my tires bump onto the uneven road. The sun was high now, but the trees were so thick on both sides that it looked like dusk inside. Light slanted through gaps in long yellow beams. I drove slow, checking for deer, because they sometimes jumped across out of nowhere. I had been driving on that narrow road for about 15 minutes when I saw something ahead that made me press the brake gently. There was a car parked on the side, partly in the ditch. It was a small red hatchback, looked dusty and old. I slowed down as I passed it, looking to see if anyone was inside. The windows were dark with dust. I could just make out the outline of a seat, but no people. I kept driving but felt a bit uneasy, wondering if someone had broken down and needed help, but I didn't want to stop alone in the middle of nowhere like that. After about 10 more minutes, the trees opened up for a short stretch. I saw a clearing with some grass and fallen branches, and that's when I noticed movement near the edge of the forest. At first I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer, I saw it was a man. He was wearing dark clothes, maybe black or navy, and he was just standing there near the tree line, facing my direction but not moving at all. I felt a small chill run through me even though it was hot outside. I drove past him slowly. As I did, I glanced at his face quickly. It was pale, and he was just staring straight ahead, not looking at me or anything. His arms were hanging by his sides. I felt something tight in my chest. My first thought was maybe he was hurt or needed help, but I kept driving. Something about him felt wrong. I checked my rearview mirror as I drove away. He hadn't moved. He was still standing there, half hidden by branches, watching the road. I swallowed and tried to shake it off. The trees closed in again, and the road got even narrower, with potholes here and there. I drove carefully, trying to keep my tires out of them. Every time I passed a curve, I felt like maybe another car would appear from the opposite side. But there was no one, just the road, the trees, and my engine humming quietly. About 5 minutes later, I saw another clearing ahead, this one much wider. There was a large fallen tree on the right side of the road, and the grass was tall and dry, brushing against my car as I passed. That's when I saw him again. The same man, same clothes, same pale face. He was standing in almost the exact same way, except now he was closer to the road, almost on the edge of the asphalt. My heart started pounding hard in my chest. I felt cold sweat start to form under my arms. I knew it was impossible for him to be there so soon unless he cut through the woods at full speed. Even then, the distance didn't match up in my head. I pressed the accelerator slightly, wanting to get out of there. As I drove past, I tried not to look at him, but my eyes went to the side anyway. He didn't move an inch. He just stared at the road ahead. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept going. The forest felt darker now. The road kept twisting and turning, and I felt like the air in the car was getting hot and heavy. I thought about calling my uncle, but there was no signal. The phone just showed one bar with no service. I kept it on my lap anyway, just feeling better holding it. I kept driving for what felt like ages, but was probably just another 10 minutes. Then the road came to a long straight stretch. I pressed down on the pedal a bit more, wanting to reach the end of this forest section as fast as possible. Halfway down the straight stretch, I saw him again. This time he was standing right in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes so hard that the seatbelt cut into my chest. My car skidded slightly to the left and came to a stop about 30 feet away from him. I could see him clearly now. His hair was dark and messy. His clothes looked dusty and torn at the edges. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking down at the asphalt, just standing there like a statue. I sat there with my foot pressed on the brake, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The engine was idling quietly. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't drive forward. I couldn't reverse all the way back. My mouth felt dry. I waited. The man didn't move. After what felt like forever, he slowly lifted his head and looked straight at me. His face was blank, no expression at all. Just empty eyes staring into the windshield. I felt panic rising in my chest. I didn't want to get out, didn't want to talk to him, didn't want to be near him. Then, as if he decided something in his head, he turned slowly to his left and walked off the road into the trees. I watched him disappear between the dark trunks. I sat there for a long minute, just gripping the steering wheel, my breathing shallow and fast. My stomach felt tight like I might throw up. Then I put the car in drive and started moving forward again, slowly at first, then faster. The rest of the road was empty. The trees eventually started thinning out, and after another 15 minutes, I saw the highway up ahead. I pulled back onto the main road, feeling like I had escaped from something heavy and dark. My phone buzzed with a couple of notifications coming back into signal. I felt tears in my eyes without really knowing why. When I reached my uncle's farm, he was standing on the porch waiting for me. I parked the car, got out, and just hugged him. My legs felt weak. He didn't ask me anything at first, just patted my back and told me to come inside and have some water. I sat there in his kitchen, drinking cold water from a glass, looking out at the wide open fields and the blue sky. Everything felt normal again, peaceful and calm. Later that evening, after dinner, I went outside alone and walked down the dirt path to the edge of his property. The sun was setting, lighting up the grass in gold and orange. I stood there breathing in the cool air. I thought about that man in the woods, about his empty face and the way he stood there so still. I didn't know who he was or why he was there. Maybe he was just someone who had broken down, or maybe he lived in those woods alone and watched cars pass for no reason. I didn't know, and I realized I didn't want to know. I spent the next few days helping my uncle fix the barn roof. We worked hard under the hot sun, hammering shingles in place, cleaning out rotting wood, and checking for leaks. At night I lay in the small guest bed, listening to crickets outside the window, thinking about that road and that man. But slowly, with each day, the feeling of fear faded. By the time I was packing up to leave, it felt almost like a dream. Something my mind had made up out of shadows and early morning coffee jitters. On my way back to the city, I didn't take that forest road. I drove the long way around, past open fields and quiet highways. I reached home late at night, parked my car, and sat in it for a while, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. I thought about how sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or creatures from old stories. Sometimes it's just a person standing completely still in a place where they shouldn't be, watching the road, waiting for nothing. I got out, locked the car, and went into my apartment, feeling grateful for walls, for doors that locked, for curtains that closed. That night I slept deeply without dreams, and in the morning, I woke up to bright sunlight pouring through my window. I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing in the light, feeling safe again, and I knew I would never drive down that old forest road alone ever again. I woke up early that morning with the sun hitting my window. I lay in bed for a while, staring at the dust floating in the thin light. I was tired even after sleeping because the past few days had been full of work and stress. I wanted a break from everything. By 7 a.m., I had packed up my bag with some snacks, water bottles, and my folding knife. I didn't feel like cooking breakfast, so I just grabbed 2 protein bars and left. I drove for about an hour out of the town. The roads were almost empty, except for a few trucks heading the opposite way. The morning air was clear but a little humid, and I could see a thin layer of fog sitting on the fields on both sides of the road. I rolled my window down and let the cool air hit my face. It felt good. I pulled into a small gravel clearing that led to a hiking trail I had found online. I had never been to this trail before, but it looked like it went deep into the woods and looped around a small lake in the middle. I parked my car under a big oak tree. The ground was uneven with scattered rocks, so my car tilted slightly to one side. I stepped out and stretched, hearing my back crack. I checked my phone. No signal. That felt good too. No one to call me or ask me anything. I locked the car, put my bag on, and started walking into the woods. The trail was narrow, just a dirt path with grass growing in the middle. There were thick bushes and trees on both sides, with the morning sun breaking through in thin golden beams. I walked slow, breathing in the smell of damp earth and pine. Birds were calling out everywhere. I stepped over fallen branches and a few small muddy patches. My shoes were getting a bit dirty, but I didn't care. After about 30 minutes, the trail started to slope downwards. The air felt cooler. I could hear water flowing somewhere nearby. I stopped and listened, closing my eyes. It sounded like a small stream. I kept walking and soon saw it, a thin stream running over rocks with moss on them. The water was clear, and I could see little fish darting under the shadows of the rocks. I crouched down and washed my hands in the cold water, rubbing my palms together. My fingers turned red from the chill. I sat there for a while, eating one of the protein bars slowly, watching the way the water moved around the stones. Everything felt peaceful. I got up and continued down the trail. It twisted left and right, up and down, never flat. I was breathing a little heavier now. The sun had fully come up, but in the forest it still felt dim. The trees were packed close together here, tall and straight, their branches high above blocking most of the light. Ferns covered the ground in some spots, and I had to push them aside to stay on the path. My clothes started to feel damp from sweat and from brushing against wet leaves. About an hour in, I stopped to drink water. My bottle was sweating cold drops onto my hand. I leaned against a thick tree trunk, feeling the rough bark dig into my shoulder blades. My heart was beating calm and steady. I didn't want to think about work or people or anything else. I just listened to the forest sounds, the wind moving leaves far above me, small birds hopping around the undergrowth, and once in a while the buzz of an insect flying past my ear. After resting, I kept walking. The trail began to widen and the ground flattened out. The trees thinned here, and I saw open space ahead. Soon I stepped out onto the shore of the lake. The water was dark, still, and smooth like a mirror. There was a fallen log half submerged near the edge. I walked down to it and sat on the log, taking off my bag and placing it beside me. The wood was damp under me, and I felt the cold seep through my pants. Across the lake I saw a small wooden dock, broken and leaning sideways into the water. The posts were dark with age, and some planks had fallen off. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the lake. The surface barely moved, only small ripples from the breeze. I felt calm but empty at the same time. My legs were starting to ache from the walk. I lay back on the log with my knees bent and closed my eyes, listening to the gentle lap of water against the shore. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the sun had shifted. It was probably close to noon. I decided to stand up and look around the lake. I picked up my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and started walking along the shore. There was no real path, just a narrow space between bushes and the water. I pushed branches away and stepped over roots. My shoes were getting soaked from wet grass. I walked for about 15 minutes when I saw something strange up ahead near the dock. I couldn't tell what it was at first, just a shape on the shore. As I got closer, I realized it was a small green tent, old and faded, set up a few meters back from the dock under some trees. The rainfly was hanging loose on one side, and the fabric was sagging like it hadn't been pitched right. It didn't look abandoned, just old. There was a small campfire ring made of blackened rocks near it, with ashes inside but no smoke. I felt uneasy. I didn't want to go near it, but I was curious. I stepped closer, slowly looking around. There was no one there. No bags, no chairs, nothing. I stood a few meters away, staring at the tent. The entrance flap was closed. The fire ring looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. The ground around the tent was packed down like someone had walked there many times, but no footprints were visible in the dry pine needles. My chest felt tight for some reason. I turned away and kept walking, not wanting to think about it. The dock creaked under my feet when I stepped onto it. I walked to the edge and looked down into the dark water. My reflection wavered, then cleared. I could see the posts disappearing into the black below. I felt dizzy staring down like that, so I stepped back onto the shore. I decided it was time to head back to the car. I didn't want to be near that tent anymore. I started walking back along the lake, retracing my steps. My mind felt foggy and heavy. The forest felt different now, quieter, heavier, like the air was thicker. I tried to shake the feeling off and focused on walking faster. Halfway back around the lake, I suddenly felt like someone was behind me. My neck tingled, and the hairs on my arms stood up. I stopped walking and listened. The forest was silent, too silent. I turned around but saw nothing except trees and bushes. I swallowed hard and kept walking, faster this time. The trail back into the woods felt darker now. The shadows were longer, and even though it was still afternoon, it felt like evening in there. I kept looking back over my shoulder, feeling my stomach twist with fear. Every time I looked, there was nothing there, but the feeling didn't go away. I started to hear sounds that made my chest tighten. Sticks snapping somewhere behind me, leaves rustling like something was moving. I walked even faster, my breath coming out sharp and loud. My eyes darted side to side, scanning every bush and tree trunk. At one point I stopped to catch my breath, leaning over with my hands on my knees. My heart was thudding so hard I felt it in my ears. I listened. The forest was still quiet. Then I heard a low crunch, like someone stepping on dry leaves. My throat closed up. I stood still, holding my breath. Another crunch, closer this time. I couldn't tell from which direction. I turned in circles, looking everywhere, but I saw nothing. My hands were shaking. I grabbed the folding knife from my pocket and flipped it open, holding it tight in my fist. I started to jog down the trail, not caring if I stumbled on rocks or roots. My bag bounced on my back. I could hear my own footsteps pounding the dirt and my breathing ragged. The air felt thick in my throat. After what felt like forever, I reached the part of the trail that sloped upwards towards where I had parked my car. My legs burned with effort, but I didn't slow down. I kept looking back every few seconds, expecting to see someone, something, following me. But every time there was nothing. I finally reached the gravel clearing and saw my car through the trees. Relief flooded my body, so hard my knees almost gave out. I ran the last few meters, pulling out my keys. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped them trying to unlock the door. I jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. I sat there for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. My chest hurt from running. I looked out the windows, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. The forest was silent again. I started the car, and the engine roared to life. I didn't waste a second. I turned around and drove out of there as fast as I could without skidding on the gravel. When I hit the main road, I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something come out of the trees behind me. But there was nothing. The drive home felt longer than before. My hands were tight on the steering wheel the whole way. My back hurt from tensing up. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a while in silence. My house looked warm and safe under the afternoon sun. I went inside, dropped my bag on the floor, and sat down on the couch. My whole body felt heavy and weak. I stared at the wall, thinking about the feeling I had in the woods. The silence, the sounds of footsteps, the feeling that someone was right behind me the whole time. I never found out what it was that day. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was a person camping out there, moving through the trees. I don't know. All I know is that I never went back to that trail again. Even now, when I think about it, my chest tightens and my skin crawls. That feeling of being watched, being followed, stays with me. It makes me look over my shoulder whenever I'm alone in the woods. Because once you feel that, you never forget it. It changes the way you see the forest. It makes you realize how small you really are out there, and how close danger can be without you ever seeing it. I woke up before sunrise that morning because my back was aching. I had slept in the back of my car, a small hatchback, folded the seats down, and thrown a thin sleeping bag over the hard surface. My knees hurt from being bent awkwardly all night, and my shoulders felt tight. I could see the gray light outside through the fogged-up windows, and the trees around the dirt pullout looked dark and cold. I didn't feel like getting up yet, so I just lay there listening to the ticking of my car cooling down from running the heater earlier in the night. Eventually, the cold air creeping into my sleeping bag forced me out. I unzipped the bag slowly, feeling goosebumps rise across my arms as I sat up. I reached for the metal bottle near my feet and drank the last of the lukewarm water from yesterday. My mouth tasted stale and dry. I pulled on my jacket and unlatched the back hatch, letting it swing open with a metallic clunk. Cool, damp air rushed in. I slid out, boots crunching softly on dirt and pine needles. I stretched, arching my back and rolling my neck. The forest was silent except for a few birds chirping far away. It was early autumn. Yellow and brown leaves lay scattered around the pullout where my car sat alone. No other cars were parked there, just mine, tucked in at the edge of the narrow gravel road that curved into the hills. I had come out here to hike. I needed to clear my head after a rough week. Work was stressful, my sleep was bad, and my thoughts kept spinning in circles at night. I thought a hike into these quiet hills might reset me. There was a small, unmarked trail I'd read about online that supposedly led down to a creek with pools deep enough to swim in, even this late in the season. I grabbed a protein bar from the front seat and chewed it slowly as I looked around. The sun still hadn't come up, but there was enough light to see my breath in front of me, a thin fog curling away into the trees. I shoved the wrapper in my pocket, locked the car, and started walking up the road until I saw a faint footpath veering off into the woods. The ground was packed dirt with fallen leaves covering it, the trail almost invisible in places. I kept my eyes low, watching for the indentations where people had walked before. As I walked deeper into the trees, the sounds of the road fell away. There were no cars anyway, just the occasional distant crow. My boots sank into the damp earth with each step, sometimes sliding a bit when I stepped on wet leaves. I kept my pace steady, feeling the cold air in my nose and lungs. My hands felt numb even inside my pockets, so I swung my arms a bit to warm them up. After about 20 minutes, the trail descended more steeply, weaving between tall pine trunks. The ground here was covered in a thick carpet of needles. I noticed old stumps where trees had been cut long ago, moss covering them. Some stumps had been split by age, forming dark hollow gaps. A few times I thought I heard small rustling noises behind me or to the sides, but every time I stopped and turned, there was nothing. I told myself it was just squirrels or birds in the undergrowth. I reached the creek after almost an hour. The water was dark and calm, flowing slowly between smooth rocks. I could see deep pools in some parts, reflecting the faint light of dawn. I crouched by the edge and dipped my hand in. It was freezing cold, numbing my fingers instantly. I pulled my hand out and shook off the water, wiping it on my pants. I stood there for a long time, just breathing and looking at the water moving silently around rocks. The smell of wet leaves and earth filled my nose, and for a moment I felt calm. I turned to start walking back, but decided to explore upstream first. The trail here was barely a trail at all, just small clearings between bushes and tree trunks. I moved slowly, pushing aside branches, stepping over fallen logs. The forest was denser here, darker even though the sun was coming up outside. The silence felt heavy, like the trees were pressing down on all sound. After about 15 minutes of pushing through bushes and stepping over roots, I came to a small open space where the creek widened slightly. A massive tree had fallen across the water long ago. Moss covered its trunk, and a few ferns were growing out of its sides. I climbed up onto it carefully, feeling the slick, wet moss under my boots, and balanced as I crossed to the other side. The moment I jumped down, I heard something ahead of me. A heavy thud, like something hitting the ground hard. I froze, listening. The thud came again, then stopped. My heart started to pound faster. I looked around, but saw nothing between the trees. I stood perfectly still, holding my breath, trying to hear past the blood rushing in my ears. After a long pause, I heard it again. This time it sounded closer, but still no footsteps, just a single thud every few seconds. It was too heavy to be a squirrel or bird dropping something. It felt deeper in my chest, like when you hear a big branch crack. I slowly crouched down and scanned the area ahead. The trees blocked most of my view, and the undergrowth was thick with bushes and fallen branches. I couldn't see anything moving, but the feeling in my stomach tightened, a hot coil of fear pressing into my ribs. I waited, hoping it would stop. But after another pause, it came again, the same deep thud. I decided I needed to get out of there. I turned slowly and retraced my steps toward the fallen log. As I climbed back up, my foot slipped slightly on the moss. My boots slid sideways, scraping the trunk loudly. The sound echoed through the trees. I froze again, half crouched on the log, and listened. The thudding sound stopped completely. For a long minute, the forest was dead silent. I held my breath, trying not to move at all. Then, I heard something new. A soft rustling, like leaves being brushed aside, but heavy, slow. It wasn't the quick darting noise of a small animal. This was steady, unhurried. Something moving carefully through the undergrowth. I felt my throat tighten. The rustling grew louder, coming from the same direction as the thuds. I realized I was still crouched on the log, completely exposed. I tried to stand up slowly, but the moss was so slick under my boots that I almost lost balance again. I managed to steady myself by gripping a small branch sticking out of the trunk. My breathing was shallow and rapid. I could feel sweat starting to form on my back despite the cold air. I stepped down from the log on the other side and crouched low, moving as quietly as I could back toward the trail. Every few steps I paused to listen. The rustling continued, sometimes stopping, then starting again, always moving in the same slow, steady way. I couldn't tell if it was following me or just heading in the same general direction. I moved faster, careful not to snap any twigs under my boots. After a few minutes, I reached the main trail. I stopped and looked behind me, scanning the bushes and trees for movement. Everything was still. The rustling had stopped. My heart was still hammering against my ribs. I stood there for a long time, just watching, listening. The wind picked up slightly, rustling leaves high in the trees. It made me flinch at first, thinking it was something else moving nearby. I started walking back toward the car, keeping my pace fast but quiet. My ears felt tuned to every sound. My boots on the dirt, the wind, the occasional drip of water from branches. My throat felt dry and tight. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something stepping out onto the trail behind me, but nothing ever did. After what felt like forever, I saw the faint light of the road ahead. Relief washed over me. I almost jogged the last few steps until I reached my car. I fumbled the keys out of my pocket, dropping them once before unlocking the door. I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, locking it instantly. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the trail where I had just come from. My chest felt tight, and my hands were trembling on my knees. I started the engine, feeling the vibration through the seat, grounding me back to reality. I took a deep breath and drove off, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again and again, half expecting to see something step out of the trees behind me. Even after I reached the main road, my shoulders stayed tense. I kept replaying the thudding noise in my mind, trying to think what it could have been. A deer? Maybe. But deer don't walk like that, and I didn't hear any hoof clicks on stone. A bear, maybe. But bears usually crunch through undergrowth or make more obvious noise. I didn't know what it was, and that was what scared me the most. For the rest of the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched me from between those trees, something that moved in a way I didn't recognize, slow and unbothered, as if it wasn't worried about me at all. I kept picturing those dark trunks, the heavy silence, and the cold, damp smell of the earth all around me. That night, when I lay in bed, I closed my eyes and heard that deep thud again, echoing somewhere out there in the darkness, reminding me that in the quiet parts of the world, there are still things we don't fully see or understand. And since that day, I never went back to that trail. Whenever people ask me why, I just tell them it was too quiet out there. But in my head, I remember that cold morning, the fallen log, the slow rustling, and the heavy thuds that seemed to follow me back through the trees. I remember the feeling in my chest, that tight, hot fear that stayed with me all the way home, and still sometimes comes back when I close my eyes at night and think of the silent, watching woods. I was 17 when I got my license. It felt like freedom in a way nothing else ever had. I didn't have to ask my parents for rides or wait for buses or sit around wasting time when I could be out driving. My car was this old silver Toyota Corolla with peeling paint on the hood and a rattling sound under the dash that no mechanic could fix, but it felt like a brand new sports car to me back then. It smelled like stale air freshener and cheap gas station coffee, and sometimes the passenger seatbelt lock would jam, but I didn't care. It was mine. I remember that summer so clearly. The heat was heavy and constant, like the air itself was pressing down on us, and every night felt like something new could happen. Back in high school, my friends and I were obsessed with the idea of finding abandoned houses. We wanted to throw parties in them, or just walk around and scare ourselves, or sit in the empty rooms feeling like we were untouchable, like the world belonged to us, because we had the guts to go where no one else wanted to go. We never really partied hard. It was more the thrill of it. Sneaking into places, exploring, feeling brave, feeling older than we were. We had a list of good candidates. There was an old farmhouse out by the reservoir, half caved in and crawling with ivy. There was a 2-story home near the industrial park with boards over the windows and a broken porch. And once we went there late at night, and raccoons ran across the floorboards above us, and we screamed so loud one of my friends almost puked from laughing so hard afterwards. But the one I kept thinking about was this huge house I saw on my way home from work. I worked at a grocery store a few towns over. Every day after my shift, I would take this back road to avoid the main highway traffic. That's where the house was. It was set far back from the road, and it wasn't really abandoned in the sense of it being old and forgotten. It was unfinished. It was like someone had started to build their dream mansion and then just stopped. The walls were up, the roof was on, but there were no windows, no doors, just these dark, empty squares where glass should be, and piles of wood and metal lying around. The grass around it had grown up taller than me in some places. You couldn't even see the front steps unless you drove right up to it. The house was huge, like something out of a magazine, but it was empty and silent, and every time I passed it I got this weird feeling in my stomach, like it was watching me go by. One day, I told my friend Kyle about it. We were supposed to go see a movie that evening, and I had picked him up from his house. We had about 30 minutes before the movie started, and I didn't feel like just sitting in the parking lot. So I told him about the house. He was instantly curious. We always hyped each other up to do dumb shit. If he said no, I'd probably have dropped it, but when I told him, he grinned and told me to take him there right now. It was summer, so even though it was almost dusk, it was still warm out. The sky was that pale grayish blue it gets just before it turns dark, and the clouds were tinted orange from the sun setting behind the hills. I remember feeling a bit nervous as we turned down the road to the house. Not scared, just that excited, tight feeling in your chest when you're about to do something you know you probably shouldn't. I flicked my headlights on as we pulled up the long gravel driveway. Rocks crunched under the tires, and dust rose up in the mirrors. The driveway curved a bit, and as we rounded the bend, the house came into view between the trees. Even though I'd seen it so many times from the road, driving right up to it felt different. It looked bigger up close and darker too. The windows were like gaping holes, and the front porch steps were covered in dead leaves and broken boards. There was an old blue tarp tangled in the bushes to the side, flapping slightly in the breeze. We didn't get out. I don't even think we said anything to each other. We just sat there for about 10 seconds, staring at the dark, unfinished frame of that huge house. My headlights lit up the front wall, and the tall grass waving in front of it. The whole place felt wrong, like there was something alive sitting just inside the doorway watching us. My chest felt tight, and I swallowed hard. Then I shifted the car into reverse and backed down the driveway quickly. When we got to the road, I turned left and headed back toward the main street where the movie theater was. Kyle was looking out the back window, making some stupid joke about how creepy it would be if we saw someone standing there waving at us from the porch. I laughed, but it was that nervous kind of laugh where your throat feels dry. We drove in silence for a bit after that. The radio was playing low, some song I can't remember, just soft music filling the space between us. The sun was almost completely down now, and streetlights were flickering on as we got closer to town. I didn't really think about the house anymore. It was just another one for the list, another place to tell our friends about later. Then, maybe a minute later, these bright lights flooded the inside of my car. I flinched and glanced in the rearview mirror. There was a big truck right behind us, its high beams on full blast. It was so close I could barely see its grille or bumper. Just bright white light filling up my mirrors and making it hard to see the road ahead. At first, I thought it was just an impatient driver trying to pass us, but the road was only 2 lanes with a solid yellow line. There was no passing until we reached the town. Carl turned around to look and said, "What the hell is this guy's problem?" But I didn't answer. I just tightened my hands on the steering wheel and kept driving. The truck stayed right behind us, so close it felt like if I even tapped my brakes, it would slam straight into my trunk. The closer we got to town, the more uncomfortable I felt. The music on the radio was still playing, but I didn't hear any of it. My ears were full of my own heartbeat. The truck's headlights were so bright I could barely see the stoplight ahead until we were almost at it. It turned yellow and I slowed down. I remember thinking, stupidly, that maybe if I stopped and let him go around, he'd leave us alone. But the truck didn't slow down. It stayed right on my bumper. I turned right at the light, hoping to get away from him. There was a gas station on the corner, and as I turned, I saw the truck suddenly swerve left into the gas station lot. My stomach dropped. Instead of pulling up to the pumps, the truck cut straight across the lot, bumping over the concrete edge, and blocked the lane right in front of us. I slammed on the brakes so hard the tires squealed. The car stopped about 5 feet from the truck's front bumper. My chest was heaving. I looked at Kyle. His eyes were wide and his mouth was hanging open a little. Neither of us moved. The truck's engine rumbled low and rough. I could see into the cab because of its lights. There was a man sitting there, huge and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark baseball cap pulled down low. For a second, he just sat there staring at us through the windshield. Then he opened his door and stepped out. He was massive. Not just tall, but thick. Heavy arms, thick neck, chest like a barrel. He wore a dirty gray t-shirt stretched over his stomach and dark jeans. His boots thudded against the asphalt as he walked toward us. I felt like my lungs stopped working. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I wanted to throw the car into reverse and drive away, but his truck was behind us and his body was in front of us. We were trapped. He walked up to my window and bent down so his face was level with mine. His face was red and sweaty, with dark stubble along his jaw. He had these tiny pale blue eyes that didn't blink. He tapped on my window with one thick finger. The tapping sound was sharp and fast. My pulse hammered against my throat. I rolled the window down about halfway. The smell of gasoline and dust rushed in from outside. He leaned down further, so his face was inches from mine. For a long second, he just stared at me. His eyes flicked over to Kyle, and then back to me. His lips were pressed into a straight line. My chest hurt. My mind was screaming at me to drive, to move, to do something, but my body felt frozen solid. Then he asked us what we were doing at the house. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding under heavy tires. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes because I was so scared. My brain scrambled for an answer. I managed to stammer out that we were just making a U-turn. I didn't even think about it. It just came out. He kept staring at me, unblinking. I remember seeing a small white scar along his chin and a mole on his neck just under his ear. For a second, I thought he was going to reach into the car and grab me. I thought he was going to yank me out and beat me or worse. My entire body felt cold and hot all at once, like I was about to throw up. Kyle didn't say a word. He was holding his breath. I could hear it. Finally, the man's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was thin and tight, like he was trying to decide something about us. Then he nodded once, straightened up, and walked back to his truck without another word. He climbed in, slammed the door, and reversed quickly out of our way. Then he pulled out onto the main road and drove off, his taillights glowing red as he disappeared into the dark. I sat there for a long minute, staring at where his truck had been. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely grip the wheel. My whole body felt heavy and weak. Kyle let out a shaky breath and wiped his face with his hand. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I rolled the window up and drove to the movie theater. We didn't say anything the whole way there. We didn't end up watching the movie. We sat in the parking lot for a while, the car still running, the cool air from the vents blowing on my sweaty face. Eventually, we just drove home. After that night, I never went near that house again. Every time I drove past it on my way home from work, I kept my eyes straight ahead and my foot steady on the gas. The grass grew taller, the walls stayed unfinished, and the window holes stayed dark. No one ever finished building it. No kids snuck in to spray paint or break things. No construction workers ever came back. It just sat there. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion late at night. It was one of those typical big family gatherings where everyone talks over each other. Kids are screaming, uncles are drinking beer out back, and aunties are gossiping on plastic chairs lined up along the porch. I remember feeling exhausted that day, but I didn't want to stay the night because I had work the next morning. I didn't even drink any alcohol, just a lot of Coke and water, because I knew I'd be driving back. The reunion was about 2 hours away from my place, and I left around 10:30 p.m. after saying goodbye to everyone, hugging my grandma, and getting a couple of leftover containers that my mom forced me to take. I stuffed them in the passenger seat and started my drive back, thinking I'd just eat the leftovers at work the next day for lunch. Most of the drive was on these narrow two-lane roads with thick bushes and trees growing right up to the edge of the pavement. The kind of roads that look beautiful in the daytime, but feel eerie at night. You know how in movies there's always those scenes where someone's driving down a dark road lined with trees, and the headlights only light up a small patch ahead, and it feels like anything could be lurking just beyond the beam. It was exactly like that. I rolled down the window for a while to let the cold air wake me up, and I had the radio on low, just to keep my mind occupied. I remember at one point a love song came on, and I felt annoyed by it, so I switched to some random AM talk radio station. The voice of the host droned on about something political. I didn't care what he was saying, I just needed sound in the car. About 45 minutes into the drive, I felt this sudden wave of tiredness. It's weird how it happens. 1 second you're fine, just normal tired, then all of a sudden your eyes are drooping and you feel like your whole body weighs a ton. I tried to fight it, rolling down the window again, slapping my cheek lightly, flexing my fingers on the wheel. But it just kept getting worse. I started blinking longer than I should have. You know when you're driving tired and you do those really slow blinks that last a second too long, and when you open your eyes it's like your brain jolts awake. It was happening over and over. I knew it wasn't safe, but I also knew I wasn't going to find any proper place to pull over soon. There were no gas stations or small towns for miles. Just trees, bushes, the winding road, and darkness. Occasionally a car would pass in the opposite lane, its headlights blinding me for a second, then disappearing behind me as quickly as it came. Eventually, I realized I wasn't going to last much longer. I kept thinking about the stories you hear of people falling asleep at the wheel for just a second, drifting over the line, and getting smashed head-on by a truck or flipping into a ditch. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I felt my chest getting tight. The idea of falling asleep while driving terrified me more than the idea of pulling over in the middle of nowhere. So I did something that wasn't smart, but felt necessary. I saw a small patch of grass just off the road, behind some bushes, and I decided to pull over there. The bushes were tall enough to hide my car from anyone driving by. I drove off the pavement onto the grass slowly, feeling my tires bump over some small rocks and twigs. I turned off my lights immediately, so no one would notice me parked there. The only light left was the dim green glow of my dashboard. I sat there for a moment, feeling my heart race, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22 p.m. I leaned my seat back a little, but not fully, just enough to rest my head. I closed my eyes, telling myself I'd only sleep for 15 or 20 minutes. Just a quick nap to get the edge off, so I could drive home safely. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I woke up to a scratching sound. It was light at first, like something brushing against the side of the car. My heart was beating fast as I opened my eyes. I looked at the clock. It said 11:50 p.m. My eyes scanned the windows, but it was too dark outside to see anything. I turned my head slowly, checking my rearview mirrors, but I couldn't see movement. The scratching stopped after a few seconds, and I was so tired that I didn't care. I let out a shaky breath and closed my eyes again, thinking maybe it was just branches brushing against the side of the car, or a raccoon or something small like that. The exhaustion was pulling me back down, and I drifted off again. The next time I woke up, it was because of the same scratching sound, but this time it was louder, more deliberate. I felt the sound vibrating lightly through the car's body. I blinked my eyes open, my heart pounding against my ribs so hard I felt slightly nauseous. I looked at the clock again. It was 12:40 a.m. Almost an hour had passed. The scratching didn't stop this time. It kept going, a slow, dragging scratch along the side of the car, then a tap on the rear window. My mouth went dry. I swallowed hard, trying to clear my throat silently. The first thought that came to my mind was an animal. Maybe a curious animal had wandered over, inspecting the car. But then I thought, why would it come back after almost an hour? Why was it scratching instead of sniffing or pawing? Why did it tap the rear window? I felt panic building up inside me. My fingers trembled as I reached for the lever to adjust the rearview mirror so I could see better. I tilted it down slightly, squinting into the darkness behind me. For a moment, I saw nothing but pitch black. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw a blur of movement. Something ran away into the trees. I couldn't make out what it was. It looked human-shaped, but maybe it was just my tired brain playing tricks on me. My chest tightened so hard I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. All I could think about was that old urban legend about the hook killer scratching at the couple's car before killing them. It sounds stupid, but when you're half asleep in the dark and you see something running away from your car, your mind just jumps to the worst possible conclusion. I told myself I wasn't going to sit there and wait to find out what it was. I sat up straight, turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. My headlights lit up the trees ahead, making the shadows dance between the trunks. I slammed the gear into drive and pulled back onto the road as quickly as I could, my tires skidding a little on the gravel before gripping the pavement. I felt adrenaline pumping through me, making my hands shake on the steering wheel. I started driving faster than I normally would on that kind of road. The lines blurred past me as I kept glancing at the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see someone or something chasing my car. My breathing was shallow, my chest rising and falling rapidly. My mind kept replaying the scratching sounds, the tap on the window, and that quick glimpse of the figure running away. Not even 100 yards up the road, there was a bend. As I came around it, my headlights lit up a car parked off to the side of the road. Its driver's side door was wide open. I slowed down automatically, staring at the empty car. There were no hazard lights flashing, no signs of movement. It was just sitting there in the dark, door gaping open like a mouth. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. My stomach turned, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I scanned the trees and the bushes around the car, searching for movement. My headlights lit up the empty interior. I didn't see anyone. I kept creeping forward, trying to look around without stopping completely. As I passed it, I glanced into my rearview mirror again. Nothing. Just darkness and my red taillights glowing on the pavement behind me. I let out a shaky sigh, feeling a tiny bit of relief. But it was only for a split second. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I saw a man come sprinting around the bend behind me. His arms were pumping hard as he ran straight towards my car. Even from that distance, I could see his face twisted in anger or desperation. I couldn't tell which. His mouth was open wide, screaming something at me. But my windows were up and the radio was still on low, so I only heard muffled shouting. He was waving his arms at me violently, gesturing me to stop, but everything inside me told me not to. I pressed down harder on the accelerator, speeding away from him as fast as I could without losing control of the car. I glanced at him one last time in the mirror, and he was still running after me, his shadow stretching long behind him in my red tail lights before the bend swallowed him up again. My heart was racing so hard that I thought I might pass out. I didn't slow down for a long time. I kept driving, checking my mirrors constantly, half expecting to see headlights chasing me, or that same man running down the middle of the road. But I never saw him again. After about half an hour, I finally reached a small town with a gas station that was still open. I pulled in, parked under the bright fluorescent lights, and just sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, trying to calm my breathing. My body was shaking all over. My legs felt weak, and my fingers were tingling. I kept looking around the parking lot, half expecting to see that man appear out of the shadows. But there was no one except an old man cleaning the gas station windows and a couple of people filling up their cars. I got out and went inside, bought a coffee even though I hate the taste of black coffee. I needed something to jolt me awake for the rest of the drive. The warmth of the cup felt good in my cold hands. I stood there by the counter for a few minutes, sipping it slowly, letting the bitter taste keep me grounded in reality. Eventually, my breathing calmed down and my heart rate returned to normal. But my mind kept replaying everything that happened. The scratching, the tapping on the window, the glimpse of that figure running away, and then that man sprinting after me, screaming for me to get out of my car. When I finally got back on the road, I kept the radio off. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, listening only to the sound of my tires humming along the pavement and the occasional creaks and groans of my car's old. I woke up early that morning with a tight feeling in my chest. It felt like there was a stone pressing down on me, heavy and unmoving. I didn't know why, but something about the day felt off before it even began. I lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the cracks in the ceiling above me, watching a small spider moving along the edge of the light fixture. My room was dim, only lit by the weak blue-gray light of dawn that came through the thin curtains. I could hear birds outside, quiet at first, then louder, as if they were arguing in the tree right outside my window. I forced myself to get up because I had work that day. I worked for a small construction company on the outskirts of town. We were building an extra storage shed for a farmer who kept supplies for his cattle feed. I washed my face with cold water and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked tired, with dark shadows under them. My hair was flat and oily because I hadn't showered the night before. I didn't care much about that these days. I pulled on a dusty pair of jeans and my faded gray hoodie and went to the kitchen. The kitchen felt colder than the rest of the house. I stood there for a while, staring at the kettle on the stove, before finally turning it on to boil water for tea. While I waited, I looked out the small kitchen window into the backyard. It was overgrown and quiet, the grass taller than it should be, bending under the early morning dew. The neighbor's dog barked once, but it sounded tired too, as if even it didn't really want to be awake yet. I poured my tea, burning my fingers on the cup as I carried it to the back door. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air smelled like wet dirt and cold metal. I sat down on the cracked concrete steps, feeling the cold soak through my jeans as I sipped the tea slowly. It didn't taste good. It tasted thin, like weak leaves and hot water. But I drank it anyway. After finishing, I grabbed my old steel-toe boots from under the kitchen table, brushing off bits of dry mud stuck to the soles, and put them on. They felt stiff around my ankles. I picked up my tool bag and walked out the front door to my truck. The truck was an old blue Nissan with dents along the sides and patches of rust eating away near the wheel wells. I unlocked it and threw the bag onto the passenger seat. As I started the engine, it made a squealing noise before finally settling into a loud rumble. I reversed out of the driveway slowly, trying not to wake up the neighbors, even though I knew they were probably awake by now. The road was quiet. I drove past rows of small houses, some with peeling paint, some with dead grass lawns, some with old cars parked in the driveway that hadn't moved in years. As I got out of town, the road narrowed and twisted through wide, empty fields with scattered cottonwood trees and dry weeds. There was a thin fog laying low across the ground, and it made everything look blurred and far away. I kept driving until I reached the farmer's land. His property was huge. There were a few cows grazing far off in the distance, their heads down, tails flicking now and then. The place smelled like manure and wet hay. I parked my truck near the unfinished shed where two of my co-workers were already there, unloading wood panels and metal sheets. I stepped out and felt the mud squelch under my boots. The air was still cold, and my fingers felt numb as I helped them carry supplies over to the work site. We worked for hours, hammering frames together, lifting heavy panels, and securing them with thick screws. The sun came out around mid-morning, burning away the fog, but it didn't feel warm. The breeze kept everything chilly. My hands hurt from gripping the metal tools. My arms burned from lifting and holding boards up for the others to fasten. Around noon, we all sat down on upturned buckets and ate lunch. I chewed my sandwich slowly, staring at the distant hills lined with dark green trees. I watched a hawk circle above the fields, its wings wide and smooth as it glided without moving. After lunch, we continued working. I climbed a ladder to hold a roof panel while one of the guys drilled it in place. My feet felt unsteady on the narrow rung. I kept thinking how easy it would be to slip and fall. The ground looked hard and rough below me, but I didn't fall. We finished fixing the roof frame by late afternoon. The shadows were long on the ground, making everything look stretched and twisted. The cows were closer now, grazing near the fence line, their ears flicking at flies that kept landing on their faces. When the boss said we could pack up, I felt relieved. My body felt heavy and sore. I loaded my tools back into my truck and sat for a while with the door open, breathing in the cold evening air. The others drove off, their trucks kicking up dust along the gravel driveway. I stayed a little longer because I wanted to smoke a cigarette before driving back. I leaned against the hood of my truck and lit one, watching the smoke curl up into the sky. The sun was almost gone, leaving streaks of pink and gold across the west. The fields looked darker, the cows just shapes against the dying light. I finished smoking and got into the truck, starting the engine with a loud rattling noise. As I began driving out along the narrow dirt road, I felt that tightness in my chest again. The road curved between small hills and patches of trees. It felt like I was driving deeper into darkness with every turn. There were no street lights here, just my headlights cutting through the dim blue shadows. I rolled down the window to feel the air on my face. It smelled like dry grass and old soil. I turned the radio on, but there was only static, so I turned it off again. As I came around a wide bend, I saw something ahead. At first I thought it was just a fallen branch, but as I got closer, I realized it was an old, torn-up mattress lying across half the road. It was stained dark, with bits of stuffing sticking out from the sides. I slowed down, feeling uneasy. There was no reason for a mattress to be out here in the middle of nowhere. I stopped a few feet away and left the engine running as I looked around. The fields on both sides were empty, dark, silent. The only sound was the rumble of my truck and the low hiss of wind brushing through dry grass. I didn't want to get out, but I knew I couldn't drive over it. It looked thick and heavy, and I didn't want to risk it getting stuck under the truck. I put it in park and stepped out, keeping the door open behind me. The ground felt colder now. I walked over to the mattress and grabbed the edge. The fabric felt rough and damp in my hands. As I pulled it off to the side of the road, I felt like I was being watched. My back felt exposed. The skin along my neck tightened, as if I could feel eyes on me from somewhere in the darkness. I finally dragged it to the side and dropped it onto the dirt shoulder. I stood there for a second, breathing hard, staring out into the empty fields. The sun was gone now, and everything was covered in that deep blue shadow right before night falls completely. I quickly got back into the truck and shut the door, locking it as soon as I sat down. My heart was beating fast for no clear reason. I drove off, trying to shake off the feeling. The rest of the road was narrow and rough. Potholes jarred the truck every few meters. The trees on either side leaned in, their branches low and tangled. I kept thinking about that mattress. Who left it there and why? It wasn't normal. It felt deliberate, like someone wanted a car to stop right there in the dark. As I came out of the tree line, I saw lights ahead. It was a small gas station sitting alone at the intersection. I felt a bit better seeing it. I pulled in to fill up before heading home. The place was empty except for a single white van parked near the side. The pumps were old, and the light above them flickered every few seconds. I got out and filled the tank, feeling the cold metal of the nozzle in my hand. I kept glancing at the van. The windows were tinted dark, and I couldn't see inside. My stomach felt tight again. I finished filling up quickly and went inside to pay. The inside of the station smelled like stale chips and burnt coffee. The floor was covered in dirt footprints and dried mud. Behind the counter, an old man with thick glasses sat reading a newspaper. He barely looked up as I paid. I walked back out, and the van was still there, engine off, lights off. I got into my truck and started it. As I backed out and turned to leave, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the van's headlights turn on. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I drove out onto the road, and the van pulled out behind me. I kept glancing at the mirror. The van stayed back a few car lengths, its headlights bright in the dark. My mind started racing. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just someone going the same way. But the feeling in my gut kept getting worse. I turned off onto a side road, a longer way home, just to see what the van would do. It turned too. My throat felt dry and tight. The road was narrow, with thick bushes and trees on both sides. There were no houses out here. I could feel sweat starting under my arms and along my back. I drove faster, but the van sped up too, staying close behind me. My headlights lit up the thin white lines of fog hugging the ground. I kept driving, taking random turns, trying to lose it. The van stayed right there behind me, never slowing down or speeding up to pass. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My chest felt like it was caving in. I saw a small dirt track coming up on the right. I turned down it hard, my tires slipping in the loose gravel. The van didn't follow. I kept driving along the dirt track until I was sure I couldn't see its headlights anymore. I stopped the truck in the middle of the track and turned off the engine. I sat there in the dark, only the sound of my breathing filling the cab. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. I waited there for nearly half an hour, staring out at the darkness around me. There were no sounds, no lights, just empty fields and cold air coming through the vents. Finally, I started the truck again and drove slowly down the track. I woke up early that morning, around 5:30 a.m. The sky outside my window was a dim gray, not fully dark but not light either, that in-between shade that always felt a bit unsettling to me. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while, rubbing my eyes, feeling that heavy morning fog in my brain that made everything slow. My room felt colder than usual. I stretched my back and stood up, feeling the wood floor's chill seep into my bare feet. I made coffee like I did every morning, standing at the counter listening to the quiet drip of the machine. I always liked the smell of coffee in the morning because it made the house feel warmer and safer, but today it didn't do that. I kept feeling like I was forgetting something, like I left the back door open or left the car lights on. I shook it off and poured my cup, taking small sips while looking out the kitchen window. The backyard looked calm, dew all over the grass, the neighbor's big pine tree still and dark against the sky. After I finished, I grabbed my small backpack, put in 2 protein bars, a bottle of water, my hunting knife, and my phone with the portable charger. I was going for a hike that day, a long one. There was this abandoned logging road that cut deep through the forest just outside town, a place no one really used anymore. I had seen it on Google Maps the other day while looking for new trails to explore. It was marked as a thin gray line curling through endless dark green. I didn't know what it was about it, but I felt pulled towards it, like I wanted to see what was left there. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I lived alone, and honestly I liked it that way. I liked leaving without explaining myself to anyone. I grabbed my truck keys, locked up the house, and stepped out into the cold morning air. The drive was about an hour, mostly empty roads through the countryside, with old wooden barns falling apart in the fields, patches of fog sitting low over the grass, making everything look ghostly even though I knew it wasn't ghosts. It was just the way the land looked when the weather changed. When I reached the logging road entrance, I pulled over onto the dirt shoulder. The road itself was blocked off with an old rusty chain stretched between 2 leaning metal posts. A faded sign warned trespassers to stay out, with chipped paint that was probably put there in the 80s. I stepped over the chain easily and started down the road. The gravel was half gone, weeds pushing through every crack. Trees crowded both sides, thick pine trunks and crooked birch leaning inwards, their branches growing over the road to form a shadowed tunnel. I felt calm there. It was quiet except for the crunch of my boots on gravel and the occasional bird somewhere high above. The air smelled like moss and cold dirt, a heavy smell that always made me think of childhood hikes with my dad. After about half an hour of walking, I came to a section where the road curved left around a small rise. I noticed broken old wood piled near the tree line. I walked over to check it out. It looked like part of an old hunting blind that had collapsed years ago. The wood was dark with rot, nails rusted orange, moss growing all over it. I poked at it with a stick just to see how soft it was, and the stick sank right through one of the planks. I moved on, following the road further. The curve ended, and the road started to climb a gentle hill. As I went up, I noticed how the trees grew thicker here, branches knotted together high above, blocking out most of the sky. The ground felt softer too, patches of soggy earth where the gravel had been washed away by rain. My boots made squelching sounds as I walked, sinking slightly into the mud with each step. I kept thinking about how far I was from the main road, how no one knew I was out here, and it gave me this strange feeling in my stomach. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a nervous alertness that made my heart beat faster for no clear reason. At the top of the hill, the road leveled out and split into two old tire tracks that disappeared into tall grass. The rest of the gravel was gone, just dirt ruts with thick weeds growing down the middle. I stopped for a moment to drink water and eat one of the protein bars. As I chewed, I looked around, trying to listen to the forest. It was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Usually there were birds, insects, maybe a woodpecker somewhere. But here it was just silent. I swallowed and packed up, brushing crumbs off my hands. I decided to keep going. I didn't want to turn around yet. The path narrowed into an old ATV track, leading into deeper forest. I followed it for what felt like an hour, though I didn't check the time. The trees here were older, their trunks thicker, the ground covered with fallen branches, dead pine needles, and soft, damp moss. The smell of earth was stronger, almost sour in my nose. I felt sweat dripping down my back under my flannel, even though the air was cold. At some point, I noticed something strange ahead. There was a small clearing, and in the middle of it was a rusted old trailer. Not a big one, just a small camping trailer, white paint peeling, windows black with dirt. It looked like it had been sitting there for decades. Weeds grew halfway up its sides, and the roof sagged inward slightly. I felt my chest tighten as I walked closer. There was no reason for a trailer to be this far into the woods, on a path almost completely reclaimed by nature. When I reached it, I stood for a while, staring. The door was half open, tilted off its hinges. Inside, I could see dark shapes, but no movement. I stepped onto the mossy cinder block that served as a step and pushed the door open more. The smell hit me first, mold, rot, rust, stale air that hadn't moved in years. My eyes adjusted to the dim interior. There was a table with two old camping chairs, the table surface covered in black mold spots. An old thermos lay on its side. There were cans stacked in one corner, their labels peeled off by moisture, metal rusted through in spots. A sleeping bag lay on the bench seat along the window, torn open at the seams with stuffing spilling out. The whole place felt like a scene frozen in time. Whoever left it had left in a hurry or didn't care to take anything. I felt my stomach twist again, that tight, sick feeling like something was wrong here, like I was standing inside someone's secret that I wasn't supposed to know. I backed out of the trailer, feeling relief as soon as I was back in the open air. I noticed then how quiet it still was. No wind, no bird sounds, nothing. Just me and that rotting trailer in the middle of nowhere. I decided to keep walking, partly because I didn't want to turn back past that trailer yet. The path continued beyond the clearing, narrower now, overgrown with brambles that scratched my jeans as I passed. I pushed through them, feeling little cuts on my hands from thorns. My boots sank into thick mud as the path dipped down into a gully. There was water pooled there, stagnant and green with algae. I stepped carefully along fallen branches to avoid sinking into it. When I climbed up the other side, I noticed something else strange. There were tire tracks in the mud, fresh ones. They weren't there on the way down. My brain struggled to make sense of it. I looked around, trying to see if an ATV or truck was nearby, but the woods were empty. I crouched down and touched one of the tracks. The mud was still wet around the edges where it had been pressed down. Someone had driven through here not long ago. My heart started to beat hard in my chest, that deep thudding feeling you get when adrenaline hits you. I stood up and listened. The forest was silent. I didn't know what to do. I felt exposed standing there on the path. I thought about turning back, but that meant passing by the trailer again, and now I was starting to feel like someone might be inside it, watching me through the dirty windows. I felt sweat on my neck turn cold in the breeze. I kept going forward instead. The path turned sharply left around a thick stand of pines. As I walked around the corner, I froze. Ahead of me, parked directly across the narrow path, was an old blue pickup truck. Its paint was chipped and faded, the bed covered with dead leaves and pine needles. The windows were dark. I couldn't see anyone inside, but I felt that same tightness in my chest, that feeling of being watched. I stepped back behind a tree and waited, listening. The forest stayed silent. I waited there for what felt like 10 minutes, trying to hear any movement, any voices, but there was nothing. Finally, I forced myself to step out and walk towards the truck. As I passed by the driver's side, I glanced in. The seat was empty. There was trash all over the floor, old fast food bags, crushed soda cans, a dirty rag. It smelled like stale cigarettes, and sweat even through the closed window. I didn't stop walking. I moved past it quickly, feeling like my back was exposed the whole time. The path beyond the truck was just forest now, no sign of any more roads or trails. I checked my phone for GPS, but I had no service. The map showed me as a blue dot in the middle of endless green. I kept going anyway, pushing through undergrowth, stepping over fallen logs, moving deeper into the trees. After a while, I came to another clearing. This one was different. It was just a wide open space where the trees had been cut long ago, leaving stumps and dead branches scattered around. In the middle of it stood a single metal folding chair, just sitting there, facing away from me towards the tree line on the other side. There was nothing else around it, no fire pit, no trash, no sign that anyone had camped there. Just that one chair in the dirt. I felt my breath catch in my throat. It made no sense. Who would drag a chair all the way out here and leave it like that? I stepped closer, half expecting someone to be sitting in it. But it was empty. The metal was rusted at the hinges. The seat had patches of old dried mud. I walked around it slowly, my boots crunching dry pine needles and twigs with each step. I kept looking back over my shoulder, feeling like someone was standing behind me, but there was never anyone there. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the silence. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ear. I woke up before my alarm that morning, something that rarely happened. My eyes opened to the dark gray light coming in through the blinds, and for a few seconds, I just lay there staring at the ceiling. I could hear the wind outside pushing through the trees in my yard. It was early spring, that time of year when the days are warming up but the nights are still cold. I felt the chill in the air when I moved my blanket off to get out of bed. My bare feet touched the cold wooden floor, sending a quick shiver up my legs and into my chest. I got up slowly, feeling the soreness in my lower back from sleeping in a weird position. I walked to the bathroom with heavy steps and turned on the dim yellow light above the mirror. My face looked tired and puffy. I splashed cold water on it and rubbed my hands down my cheeks to wake up properly. After brushing my teeth and washing my face, I walked back into my room, grabbed my jeans from the chair, and pulled them on over my boxers. I put on a plain gray t-shirt and my black hoodie before stepping out into the kitchen. The house felt empty and silent. I could hear the ticking of the small clock on the kitchen wall. It was only 6:15 a.m. I made myself a cup of instant coffee. I stirred the hot water into the powder with a spoon and watched the little brown lumps dissolve into the water. I stood there sipping the coffee while staring out the window at the backyard. The trees were swaying slowly, their branches bending and returning upright with each push of the wind. The grass was covered in dew, making it look darker than usual. There was a faint smell of wet soil coming in through the open window above the sink. After finishing my coffee, I washed the mug and placed it upside down on the drying rack. I felt restless. I didn't have work that day. My boss had told me to take a break after a full week of overtime shifts. I thought about what to do and decided to go for a hike. There was a trail about 20 minutes away that I used to go to often, but I hadn't been there in months because of work. It wasn't a tourist spot or anything like that. It was an old Forest Service trail that ran through the hills and connected to the main ridge trail about 10 miles up. It was usually empty. The parking area at the trailhead was small, just a dirt patch with space for 3 or 4 cars. I put on my shoes, grabbed my black cap, and picked up my small hiking bag. I filled up my metal water bottle and put it in the side pocket, then grabbed a few protein bars from the shelf and tossed them into the bag. I left my phone charging on the kitchen counter and took my old Nokia with me instead. It didn't have signal up there anyway, and I only kept it with me in case my car broke down and I needed to call for help once I got closer to town. Before leaving, I locked the front door and stood for a moment on the porch, feeling the cold breeze on my face. The sky was turning brighter gray, but there were no hints of blue yet. I drove out of my driveway and onto the empty road that led out of town. The street lights were still on, glowing orange against the dull morning light. My car heater wasn't working properly, so I rubbed my hands together as I drove, trying to warm up my fingers. The drive was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of my engine and the occasional rattle of the plastic bottle in the cup holder when the car went over small bumps. I passed by a few farmhouses with their porch lights still on. Some cows stood out in the fields, their shapes dark against the lighter grass. As I got closer to the hills, the road turned narrower, with dense trees lining both sides. I drove slowly because the road was uneven, with cracks and potholes scattered along the way. When I finally reached the parking spot, I pulled in and turned off the engine. I sat there for a minute listening to the ticking sound of the engine cooling down. There were no other cars parked there. I opened my door and stepped out, feeling the cold air rush into my hoodie. I put on my cap and tightened the strap of my bag across my chest. I looked around. The forest was silent, except for the wind moving through the tall pine trees. I walked over to the wooden sign at the start of the trail. The paint was peeling off, and I could barely read the letters that said Ridge Access Trail, 10.4 miles. I started walking along the trail, feeling the crunch of dry pine needles and small twigs under my shoes. The air smelled fresh, a mix of pine and cold dirt. As I walked, I noticed how the trail narrowed in some places, with overgrown bushes brushing against my legs as I moved through them. About an hour into my hike, I stopped to drink some water. I took off my bag, sat down on a fallen log, and listened to the sound of the forest around me. I could hear birds high up in the trees, singing to each other in short chirps. I looked down at the ground and saw little trails of ants moving along the side of the log. The forest felt alive but calm. After resting for a bit, I stood up and kept walking. The trail started to slope upward, making my calves burn with each step. I was breathing harder, feeling the cold air sting my nostrils as I took in big breaths. I stopped for a second to catch my breath and looked up ahead. The trail curved to the right, and I could see patches of bright light coming through the trees where the sun was starting to break through the morning clouds. I kept walking for another hour, lost in my own thoughts, when I suddenly smelled something odd. It was faint at first, but as I kept walking, it became stronger. It smelled like something rotten mixed with wet soil. I stopped walking and looked around, trying to find where it was coming from. To my right, about 20 feet off the trail, I saw a pile of what looked like old blankets. I squinted and realized it wasn't blankets. It was the remains of a deer, half covered in dirt and pine needles. Its rib cage was exposed, and parts of its body were missing. The smell hit me stronger as the wind shifted. I covered my nose with my hoodie sleeve and turned away. I had seen dead animals before while hiking, but the way this one was half buried made me uneasy. I started walking faster, trying to get away from the smell. As I moved along, the trail became steeper and rockier. The sun was fully out now, and patches of light lit up the ground in front of me. I heard the sound of wood cracking somewhere to my left. I stopped and looked towards the sound. The trees were dense there, and I couldn't see anything clearly. I stood still listening. Another crack, closer this time, like someone stepping on a dry branch. I felt my heart beating faster. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a squirrel. I kept walking, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. I tried to ignore it and focused on my footsteps, watching the ground carefully so I wouldn't trip on any roots or rocks. After another hour of climbing, I reached a flat area where the trail widened. There were a few large rocks scattered around, and I sat down on one to rest. I took off my bag and drank some more water, breathing hard from the climb. I felt sweat sticking to my back under my hoodie. The forest was silent again, except for the sound of the wind moving through the treetops. As I sat there, I noticed movement to my right. I turned quickly, expecting to see a deer, but instead I saw a man standing there, about 30 feet away. He was wearing dark brown pants and a faded green jacket. His hair was messy, and he had a long beard that almost reached his chest. He was standing perfectly still, looking at me. I felt my chest tighten. I raised my hand slightly, not to wave, but just as an automatic reaction. He didn't move. He just kept staring at me. I felt a chill run through my body despite the warmth of the sun. I put my water bottle back in my bag without taking my eyes off him. I stood up slowly, slinging the bag over my shoulder. He still didn't move. I turned back towards the trail and started walking, trying not to show that I was scared. My steps felt heavy, and I could feel his eyes on my back as I walked away. I didn't want to turn around. I kept walking at a steady pace, forcing myself not to run. My ears were filled with the sound of my heartbeat and my breathing. After a few minutes, I finally glanced back. He was gone. The spot where he stood was empty. I kept walking faster now. My mind was racing with thoughts. Who was he? Why was he out here just standing in the trees? I thought about turning back to my car, but I felt like going back down the same trail would be worse. I decided to keep going up towards the ridge trail. It connected to another service road that eventually led down to a different parking area, though it was much further. I walked for another hour without stopping, my legs burning with each step uphill. Every little sound in the forest made me flinch. The rustle of leaves, the snap of small branches under my feet, the distant call of birds. Everything felt louder and more threatening. Finally, I reached the ridge. The trail leveled out, and I could see far into the distance. Hills rolled away under the bright blue sky, their slopes covered in dark green pine forests. The wind was stronger up here, making the trees sway and creak around me. I stopped to catch my breath and looked back down the trail. There was no one there. I kept moving along the ridge trail, hoping to reach the service road before dark. I ate one of my protein bars while walking, chewing slowly and swallowing hard because my throat felt tight with fear. The trail along the ridge was narrow and rocky. On my right side was a steep drop, and on my left was a dense line of trees and bushes. I walked carefully, feeling the rocks shift under my shoes. After about 30 minutes, I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like someone stumbling on loose rocks. I turned quickly. At first, I saw nothing. Then, from behind a cluster of bushes, the man appeared again. He was closer this time, maybe 50 feet away. He was still staring at me. His eyes looked dark under his messy hair, and his beard moved slightly in the wind. I felt my hands go cold and numb. I turned back around and started walking faster, almost jogging. I woke up before the sun rose, like I always did when I went hunting. It was early October, the mornings were cold, and the leaves had just started turning from green to dull orange and brown. I could hear the cold wind brushing against the siding of my small house. I lay there in bed for a few minutes, listening to it whistle through the gaps around my window. It was still dark outside, but I felt awake. I swung my feet over the edge of the bed and felt the cold wooden floor under my socks. I stood up, stretched my back until it cracked, and then walked to the small kitchen area. I put water in the old metal kettle and set it on the stove. I didn't turn the lights on because I didn't want to ruin my night vision. I grabbed my thermos and my old hunting backpack from the corner by the door. I put 2 granola bars and a pack of jerky inside, then filled the thermos with the hot water once the kettle started to hiss. I stirred in instant coffee until it turned dark and smelled strong. I slipped into my thick hunting pants, zipped up my thermal jacket, and tied my boots tight around my ankles. I grabbed my rifle from where it leaned against the doorframe, checked the safety, and slung it over my shoulder. Then I stepped out into the cold, dark morning, locking the door behind me. The ground crunched under my boots as I walked to the truck. Frost had covered the windshield and roof. I scraped it off with my old hotel loyalty card because I could never find my proper scraper. I drove down the dirt road for about 30 minutes, through winding bends and narrow passes between thick stands of pines and dry brush. The headlights shone into the fog hanging low over the fields. A few deer scattered across the road ahead of me, and I slowed down, letting them bound off into the dark trees. Eventually, I reached the spot I'd marked on the old paper map. I parked on the side of the forest road and turned the engine off. Everything went silent, except for the ticking of the cooling engine and the occasional drip of condensation falling from the trees onto the roof. I grabbed my pack, slung it on, checked the rifle again, and set off down a narrow game trail that led into the thick forest. My boots sank softly into the dead pine needles and rotting leaves. The trees loomed high over me, blocking out what little light was beginning to show in the sky. I walked for about an hour, just listening to my own breathing and the faint creaking of branches moving in the wind above me. When I reached a fallen log near a clearing, I stopped and sat down to drink some coffee. The steam curled up into my face and fogged my glasses for a moment. I watched the clearing as the sun began to rise behind me, throwing pale light onto the brown grass and dry weeds. I could hear crows calling in the distance. Everything felt calm and still. After about 20 minutes, I heard a rustle from the trees on the other side of the clearing. I slowly set down my thermos and lifted my rifle, resting it across my knee. I squinted, trying to make out the shape moving through the brush. It was low to the ground, quiet and cautious. I assumed it was a deer, so I flipped off the safety and waited, keeping my breathing slow and steady. The shape stepped out into the clearing. It was a coyote. Its fur was patchy and dull, and it looked thin. I watched it sniff around the edges of the grass, looking for mice or something to chew on. I didn't move. I didn't have a tag for coyote, and even if I did, I wouldn't waste a round on an animal that scrawny. It wandered back into the trees after a few minutes, and I stood up, stretching my stiff knees. I decided to move deeper into the woods, closer to the creek that ran through the valley. The walk took me about another hour. The terrain became steeper, and rocks jutted out between the tree roots. My boots slipped once or twice, sending small stones skittering down into the shadows below. When I reached the creek, I stopped to rest again. The water was low and clear, trickling over the rocks with a soft sound that filled the silent forest. I crouched down and splashed some on my face. It was ice cold. I looked around. I hadn't seen another hunter all morning. It felt like I was completely alone out here. The feeling was peaceful, but it also made me feel small and exposed. I decided to follow the creek upstream, thinking I might find some fresh deer tracks near the water. I walked slowly, careful where I stepped. The sun was up now, though it barely reached through the tall pines and tangled undergrowth. The cold breeze made the leaves hiss against each other. Birds flitted from branch to branch overhead, sending small showers of dead leaves down around me. After about half an hour, I found a spot where the bank rose up sharply on one side. I scrambled up, grabbing at roots and rocks until I reached the top. I stood there for a minute, catching my breath. Then I saw something strange further up the bank, under a cluster of fallen branches and brush. It looked like a pile of clothes at first. I walked closer, picking my way through the thorny bushes that grabbed at my pants. When I got within a few feet, I realized it was a tent. A small two-person tent, old and faded. The rain fly was missing, and the fabric was torn in places. Moss and leaves covered most of it. It looked like it had been there for years. I crouched down and looked through the broken mesh window. Inside, there was a sleeping bag, unzipped and half covered in dirt and old leaves. There were empty cans scattered around, rusted through at the bottoms. A backpack lay in one corner, the straps chewed through by animals. I reached in and pulled it out. The zipper was stuck, so I pried it open with my knife. Inside, there were some old clothes, a moldy roll of toilet paper, and a torn paper map stained with water damage. I couldn't see a name on it. I stood up and looked around the small campsite. It felt wrong. The tent looked like whoever had stayed here left in a hurry, or maybe never left at all. I checked the sleeping bag more carefully. It was damp and stiff with age. There was no sign of blood or bones, just rot and dirt, but something about the emptiness of the campsite made my stomach twist. I kept moving up the creek, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. The air felt colder now, though the sun was higher in the sky. I walked for another hour, stopping now and then to listen for any sounds of animals moving in the trees. Every time I stopped, it felt like the forest held its breath with me. At around noon, I reached a spot where the creek split into two small streams. Between them was a flat area with soft, muddy ground. I saw fresh tracks there. Deer tracks, heading south along the eastern stream. I crouched down, touching the edges of the hoof prints. They were sharp and clear, maybe from this morning. I stood up, stretched my back again, and started to follow them. The tracks weaved through tight clusters of young pine trees. Their branches slapped against my shoulders as I pushed through. After about 15 minutes, I reached a wide open area where the trees had been cleared, probably by loggers decades ago. Tall grass covered the ground, swaying in the wind. The tracks disappeared into the grass. I stepped forward, scanning the area. My heart beat a little faster. This felt like a good place to set up. I walked about 20 yards in and found a small rise in the ground with a half-rotted log laying across it. I sat down behind it, propping my rifle on top, and settled in to wait. The sun rose higher. Clouds drifted across the sky, blocking the warmth for a few minutes at a time. I sipped my coffee, chewed on some jerky, and watched the field. Hours passed like that. I shifted my weight every once in a while when my legs went numb. Birds sang, insects buzzed in the grass, and the wind never stopped moving. By mid-afternoon, I hadn't seen a single deer. I sighed, rubbing my face with both hands, feeling the stubble on my cheeks. I decided to call it a day and head back to the truck before it got dark. The walk back would take a couple hours, and I didn't want to be stumbling around these woods with only my headlamp lighting the way. I stood up, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and started walking back the way I came. My boots crunched softly on the dead grass. As I entered the tighter part of the forest again, I noticed something strange. A faint smell, like old garbage left in the sun. I wrinkled my nose and kept walking. The smell got stronger. I slowed down, scanning the ground and the trees around me. Then I saw it. About 10 feet off the trail, behind a fallen tree, there was a large shape lying on the ground. At first I thought it was a dead deer, but as I stepped closer, my stomach dropped. It was a bear, a full-grown black bear, lying on its side. Its fur was matted with dirt and dried blood. Flies buzzed around its face and open mouth. The smell hit me like a punch to the chest. I froze. My eyes darted around the clearing. Bears don't just die for no reason out here. I scanned its body. There were bullet wounds on its side, 3 small holes grouped tightly behind its shoulder. The wounds were clean, but its body looked bloated and stiff, meaning it had been dead for at least a day or two. I felt something prickly creep up my spine. Hunters don't leave meat like this. Even if they shot the bear for safety, they would at least report it to Fish and Game. I stepped back, looking around me again, feeling suddenly exposed and watched. Then I noticed something else. Behind the bear, near the base of a tree, there was a plastic bag hanging from a branch. I walked over to it, careful to keep my rifle ready. The bag was tied shut, but when I opened it, I found empty ammo boxes, food wrappers, and cans. Someone had been camping here recently. The trash was clean and new, not rotted like the old campsite I'd seen earlier. I turned around slowly, scanning the trees in every direction. I couldn't see anyone, but the feeling in my chest kept growing tighter. I didn't want to be here anymore. I put the bag back where I found it and started walking faster down the trail, following the creek downstream toward my truck. Every snap of a twig behind me made my shoulders twitch. I woke up early that morning feeling tired, like I hadn't slept properly even though my eyes had been closed all night. The sun was still low, spreading a pale orange glow across my room. I rubbed my face hard with both hands and sat there on my bed for a while, looking down at the floorboards. I could hear the birds outside starting their day, making that high-pitched chatter that fills the air before everything gets busy and loud. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, brushed my teeth, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. My hair stuck up at odd angles, and there were faint dark circles under my eyes. I didn't care. I pulled on my faded jeans and an old dark blue t-shirt, tied my shoes, and grabbed my cap from the hook by the door before heading outside. The wooden steps creaked under my feet as I stepped down onto the dirt path that led away from my small house. The morning air was cool, almost cold, and smelled of dry grass and pine needles. I could see my breath for a moment before it faded into the quiet. I walked around to the back of the house where my old rusted pickup was parked under the oak tree. The metal was cold when I grabbed the handle. I opened the door, climbed in, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel for a while. Everything was still. I looked at the empty passenger seat beside me, at the small tear on the side of the cushion, at the cracked dashboard, at the dirty floor mats. Then I put the key in and turned it. The engine took a few tries to start, coughing before it finally rumbled to life. I drove out onto the narrow road leading into the forest. The tires crunched over dry gravel as I passed the neighbor's property. Their cows stood still in the morning fog, silent and watching. Further along, I turned left at the fork and went deeper into the forest road. I knew where I was going. I had been there many times, but today I felt different, heavy in my chest. like my bones were tired before I had even done anything. After half an hour, I parked the truck off the road in a small clearing surrounded by thin trees and thick bushes. I stepped out and stretched my legs. The sun was higher now, and the light flickered through the leaves above me. I grabbed my old army green backpack from the back seat, checked that my water bottles were full, zipped my knife case onto my belt, and started walking into the woods. The forest was quiet except for the soft wind shaking the leaves. Dry twigs cracked under my boots with each step. I kept walking, feeling the uneven ground shifting under my feet, roots poking up here and there. I walked for an hour straight without stopping. Sweat ran down my back, soaking the waistband of my jeans. Mosquitoes buzzed near my ears, and I kept swatting them away. The smell of earth, dead leaves, and sap from pine trees was strong, filling my nose with every breath. I liked that smell. It made me feel calm most days, but today I just felt tired. After a while, I came across a fallen tree blocking the path. Its trunk was thick and rotting, covered in dark green moss. I stepped over it carefully, feeling the bark crumble under my boot. The forest floor beyond it dipped down into a shallow valley filled with ferns and tall grass. I walked down slowly, keeping my eyes on the ground for any snakes that might be lying in the sun. At the bottom of the valley was a small creek, no more than 2 feet wide, its water clear and cold, bubbling over smooth stones. I knelt down and splashed some on my face, feeling it drip down my chin and neck. I cupped my hands, drank a few sips, and stood up again. My knees cracked loudly as I straightened them. I wiped my hands on my shirt and kept going, crossing the creek with one long step onto a flat rock on the other side. I walked up the slope beyond the creek, grabbing onto small trees to help me climb. When I reached the top, I stopped to catch my breath. The forest here was thicker, darker, the sunlight barely reaching the ground. Dead branches lay scattered everywhere, covered in dry brown needles. The smell here was stronger too, damp and earthy, mixed with the faint smell of something rotting somewhere deeper in the trees. I ignored it and walked on. After a while, I reached the old fire tower. It stood alone in a small clearing, tall and thin with rusting metal stairs winding up its side. The boards at the base were old, cracked, and covered in moss. I dropped my backpack against one of the posts and looked up. The tower had been out of use for years. The top was boarded up, the windows dark and broken. I climbed a few steps to check the view. The metal shook under my weight, and the rust flaked off under my boots. I could see the tops of the trees stretching far in every direction. The wind blew harder up here, whistling softly between the rails. I climbed back down and sat on a low stump to drink some water. My hands shook a little as I twisted the cap off the bottle. I wiped sweat off my face with my sleeve. The forest was silent, completely silent. No birds, no wind in the leaves, just heavy quietness pressing down around me. I looked around slowly, feeling that crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I stood up, slung my backpack on again, and decided to keep walking. I didn't want to sit still in that silence. I walked deeper into the forest past the tower, through thick brush that scratched at my jeans. I pushed through with my arms, branches snapping back and hitting me across the shoulders. The air smelled stronger here, like wet dirt mixed with a sour, almost metallic smell. I didn't know what it was. I kept walking, ignoring it, trying to focus on the path ahead. After another hour, I came to a small clearing filled with long dead grass. The ground here felt soft under my feet, like the soil was damp and sinking slightly as I stepped. In the center of the clearing was something that didn't belong, a black shape half buried in the grass. I walked closer, feeling my heart beat faster. It was an old tarp, torn in several places, weighed down by stones at the corners. I bent down and grabbed a corner, lifting it carefully. Underneath was a deep hole, a perfect square dug into the ground, about 3 feet wide and going down at least 6 feet. The walls of the hole were straight and clean, like they were cut with sharp shovels. At the bottom was black mud mixed with dead leaves. I let go of the tarp corner and stepped back. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't like it. I didn't know why it was there or who had dug it. I turned around and walked back into the trees quickly, feeling like I needed to get away from that clearing. The smell followed me as I walked, that sour metallic smell stronger now. I breathed through my mouth and kept moving. My legs felt weak, like I had been walking for days. Sweat ran down my temples and into my eyes, stinging them. The ground started to slope upwards again, steeper this time. I grabbed tree trunks to pull myself up, slipping on the dry needles and small loose stones. When I reached the top, I was breathing hard, my chest tight. I stood there looking down into the next valley. The trees here were thinner, letting in more light. I could see broken branches scattered across the slope. And then I saw it. About 30 feet down the slope was an old tent. It was collapsed, half buried in leaves, its poles snapped and sticking out at odd angles. The fabric was sun-bleached and torn. I stood there staring at it, feeling that same crawling feeling in my chest. I walked down slowly, watching my footing on the loose soil. When I reached the tent, I could see that it had been there for a long time. Moss had grown over parts of the fabric. The zipper was rusted shut. I bent down and pulled the flap open. Inside was a sleeping bag, half unzipped, covered in dirt and pine needles. I could see the shape of something inside it. My stomach turned cold. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the bag and pulled it back slowly. Inside were clothes, bunched up and stuffed down to make it look like someone was sleeping there. Old jeans, a flannel shirt, and a dark jacket, all folded and stuffed into the bag. I let out a long, shaky breath and sat back on my heels. I stood up and backed away from the tent. I didn't know why anyone would do that. I looked around the clearing again and noticed a small pile of empty food cans stacked neatly against a tree. The labels were worn off by rain and sun. The cans were rusted through. Flies buzzed around them lazily. I turned and walked back up the slope. My legs were shaking with each step. I reached the top and kept walking, faster now, pushing through the brush, ignoring the branches scratching my arms and face. I didn't want to be there anymore. The quietness of the forest pressed down around me again, heavy and thick, like it was trying to keep me there. After a long while, I finally came back to the fire tower clearing. My truck was parked down the slope where I had left it. I walked down, almost running now, stumbling over roots and small rocks. When I reached the truck, I threw my backpack in the back seat and climbed in, slamming the door shut. I sat there for a long time, breathing hard, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The forest outside the windows felt dark and silent, even though the sun was still high. I started the engine and turned the truck around, driving back down the narrow dirt road without looking back. My tires kicked up dust that hung in the air behind me like a cloud. I drove all the way home without stopping. My chest felt tight the whole way. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't open the windows. I just drove, staring at the road ahead, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. When I finally reached my house, I parked the truck in the shade and sat there for a while with the engine off. My breathing slowed down. I looked out at the yard, at the grass moving in the breeze, at the empty porch, at the silent windows. Everything looked normal, the same as it always was. But I didn't feel the same. I felt like something from that forest had followed me home. Not a person or an animal, just a feeling, that heavy feeling sitting in my chest. I got out of the truck and walked up the porch. I never thought that a simple drive through the countryside would become something I'd keep replaying in my mind for months. That day started like any normal Sunday. I woke up late, feeling bored at home. The weather was hot but dry, and I didn't feel like staying inside all day. I decided I'd go for a drive. I always liked driving down old rural roads outside of town, the ones that led deep into farmlands and wooded areas. There was something peaceful about seeing the endless rows of crops, the scattered barns, and the dusty dirt roads winding through small hills. I left around noon after a quick breakfast, taking my water bottle and a phone charger. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. It wasn't something I thought about. I just wanted to drive around, listen to music, maybe stop and walk down some trails I hadn't explored before. I wore black track pants, a faded gray shirt, and my old running shoes. They were comfortable enough for short hikes. I drove for about an hour and a half, going further and further out until there were no houses in sight. Only empty fields, dense trees along the horizon, and small dirt paths branching off the main paved road. The sun was bright above me, making everything look golden and dry. I rolled down my window to feel the hot wind rush in, mixing with the smell of hay and dry earth. Eventually, I saw a dirt path leading into a wooded area I hadn't been to before. There was an old metal gate on the side, bent and rusted, barely attached to the fence it was meant to hold. A small, hand-painted sign on a wooden post nearby said, "Private, no hunting, no dumping." It looked abandoned. The lock on the gate had been broken off. I checked my phone for a signal. 2 bars. That was enough. I parked my car off the road and stepped out. The place was silent except for the quiet rustling of leaves in the distance. I pushed the broken gate open and started walking down the path. The ground was dry and dusty with patches of grass sticking out. As I walked deeper, tall trees grew closer together. They weren't thick forest trees, but more like thin, scattered cottonwoods mixed with old bushes and undergrowth. The shadows grew cooler and darker as I walked further in. I liked the feeling of being away from roads and cars. It felt like a small escape. After about 15 minutes, I reached an old clearing. There were remnants of what looked like an abandoned homestead. A collapsed wooden shed stood to the left, with planks rotting on the ground. To the right, there was an old rusted tractor half covered in weeds. I walked around it, brushing away dry grass to read faint letters on its side. The metal was hot under the sun. Birds chirped somewhere high above me, but I couldn't see them through the tree canopy. I kept walking past the clearing, following a narrower path leading downhill. The path became uneven with loose stones and fallen branches. I had to watch each step to avoid twisting my ankle. Sweat dripped down my back, making my shirt stick to my skin. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Even the birds were silent now. Only my footsteps echoed in my ears. After a while, I started feeling uneasy. I wasn't scared yet, but something about the silence felt wrong. I told myself it was because I was alone in an unfamiliar place, but the feeling stayed. I thought of turning back, but my curiosity pushed me further. I reached the bottom of the small hill where the path opened into a wide, dry creek bed. It hadn't held water in months, maybe years. Small animal tracks crisscrossed along the sandy surface. The air felt heavier down there, cooler too. The smell changed, becoming damp and earthy. I decided to cross the creek bed to see what was on the other side. As I stepped down, the sand shifted under my feet. I walked across slowly, watching for any snakes. Halfway across, I saw something strange on the opposite bank. It was a mound of dirt with a piece of torn blue tarp sticking out. The tarp was held down by two large rocks on each end, as if someone tried to cover or hide something under it. I felt a chill despite the heat. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, trying to decide if I should go closer. My chest felt tight. I told myself it was probably just trash someone dumped illegally. Maybe an old mattress or insulation foam. But my legs moved on their own, carrying me forward. As I got closer, the smell hit me. It wasn't strong at first, just a faint sweet rotting smell mixed with dirt. I froze, staring at the tarp. Flies buzzed around its edges, landing and taking off again and again. My heart started beating faster. I reached out and grabbed one corner of the tarp. My fingers trembled. I pulled it back slowly, just enough to see underneath. The dirt was darker there, damp, and I saw hair. Brown matted hair tangled with grass and mud. For a second my brain didn't understand what I was seeing. Then it clicked, and I jumped back, almost slipping down the bank. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to breathe as I stared at the exposed patch of hair. It wasn't an animal. The hair was too long, too human-like. I didn't pull the tarp back any further. I didn't want to see the face. My hands shook as I stepped away. I backed up until I was at the bottom of the creek bed again, staring up at the tarp-covered mound. My mind raced. Who left it there? Why was it there? I felt a sudden panic rising in my chest. I needed to leave. I turned around and climbed up the bank as fast as I could, grabbing onto tree roots and rocks to pull myself up. When I reached the top, I started running back the way I came. My feet hit the dirt path hard, sending small puffs of dust behind me. My breathing became rough and loud. Every tree looked the same. I tried to remember the turns I took, the way back to the clearing, but everything blurred together. Sweat dripped into my eyes, stinging them. I wiped it away with the back of my hand, almost tripping over a hidden root. After what felt like forever, I reached the old clearing with the rusted tractor. My chest burned with each breath. I stopped for a moment, bending down with my hands on my knees, trying to calm down. My ears rang with the sound of my own heartbeat. The shadows had grown longer now, darker. I didn't want to stay there any longer. I stood up and kept running, forcing my legs to move. The path seemed longer going back. My throat felt dry and raw, my stomach twisted in knots. I kept looking over my shoulder, even though I didn't hear anyone behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there, watching, following silently. When I finally saw the broken gate in the distance, my chest felt like it might explode with relief. I ran through it, nearly ripping my shirt on the rusted metal, and stumbled out onto the roadside. My car stood there, shining under the evening sun. I ran to it, unlocked the door with shaking hands, and threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. I locked it instantly and sat there, gasping for air, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. For a long moment, I didn't move. I stared out at the dirt path behind the gate, half expecting to see someone walk out, but no one came. Only the silent trees stood there under the fading light. My whole body shook as I reached for my phone. I wanted to call the police, but stopped myself. What if I was wrong? What if it was a dead animal under the tarp and I sounded insane reporting it? My mind spun with fear and doubt. I decided I would call once I was out of there. I turned on the engine, backed up onto the road, and sped off without looking back. As I drove back home, the sky turned orange, then dark blue, then almost black. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting headlights to appear behind me, but the road stayed empty. My heart refused to slow down. Every passing shadow made me jump. I didn't even turn the music on. I drove in silence, listening to the hum of my tires on the road, trying to keep myself together. When I reached town, I pulled into a gas station and sat there under the bright lights for a while. People walked in and out of the shop, buying snacks and drinks. Life moved on normally around me, while I sat there feeling like my chest was about to burst open. Finally, I picked up my phone and called the local sheriff's office. My voice shook as I told them what I found and where it was. They said they would send a deputy to check it out immediately. I gave them my name and number in case they needed to contact me. I sat there for another half hour before I felt ready to drive home. My hands still shook as I unlocked my front door and walked into my silent house. I went straight to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up at myself in the mirror, my eyes were bloodshot and tired. My shirt was soaked in sweat, dirt smeared on my arms and neck. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tarp, the hair tangled with dirt, and the flies buzzing around it. I felt like throwing up each time the memory played in my mind. I didn't sleep until morning light started creeping through the blinds. 2 days later, the sheriff's office called me back. They confirmed it was a woman's body under the tarp. They said she had been reported missing a few weeks earlier. They asked me a few more questions about what I saw, if I noticed anything unusual nearby, any tire tracks or footprints, but I hadn't. The call ended with them thanking me for reporting it. I sat there holding the phone, feeling cold despite the heat of the day. I kept thinking about who put her there. Was it someone she knew? Was it a stranger? Did they watch me when I found it? Were they still out there, hiding in those trees, waiting to see who might come across what they buried? The thoughts haunted me every time I closed my eyes. For days, I felt like I was being followed. I kept checking behind me when walking to my car or down the grocery store aisles. I couldn't relax. My stomach stayed tight, my chest felt heavy all the time. Weeks passed, then months, but the memory didn't fade. Sometimes I woke up at